People probably rarely think about what they would do if they found themselves in the world of an otome game. In one of these, everything looks very bright and colorful, and even the cups of tea exude warmth. At this moment, a beautiful girl with long red hair and a cute face is sitting at the table. Her bright turquoise eyes cannot go unnoticed and completely immersed in them. This is exactly what one of the handsome guys sitting opposite this girl is doing now. After that, she stretches out her thin and graceful hands to the mug of tea that stands on the table. The girl takes a sip and enjoys the wonderful taste and relaxing atmosphere. However, everything suddenly changes, and an immeasurable horror appears in the eyes of this person. The cup falls from her hands and shatters into pieces, disturbing all the peace and quiet. After this, she finds herself on the floor and does not understand what she did to deserve such a fate. A trace of blood appears on her hand, and someone's shadow hangs over her. While the handsome man is leaning over the girl's body, she thinks that she must get out of this place at any cost. Meanwhile, the action takes place in a modern city in one of the low-rise buildings. A certain girl is in her room and talking on the phone, promising to send money as soon as she is free. At this point, she talks to her mother and asks if she knows what day it is. But she doesn't understand what her daughter is talking about, which makes the girl depressed. After this, her mother says goodbye to her, as it is time for her to have dinner and there is no more time for communication. The girl puts down the phone and notices a small, bright box next to her. It contains one piece of cake that she bought at a discount in honor of her birthday. When the girl was still in elementary school, her mother remarried, and their family was expanded by 2 more children. They were very abusive towards their newly acquired sister and pulled her hair, causing her severe pain. However, her mother did not pay any attention to this and was busy with her new family. She turned away from the girl, showing her all her indifference and apathy to her problems. Her mother suddenly stopped being interested in anything connected with the past, including her daughter. At this moment, the girl returns to reality and is distracted from her memories, as she receives a message on her smartphone. But she didn't expect anyone else to want to contact her at such a late hour. The girl picks up the phone and sees that it is a message from her friend Rui. She tells her that she has finished working on their collaborative otome game and it is now available for download. After this, the girl sees high-quality art of this game, which is called White Lily Serenade. Rui is her friend from high school, where they came up with the idea of creating an otome game. The main character of this game is the beautiful daughter of the Duke with long white hair. She has been proposed to by 5 love interests, and her main goal is to find her love. But the heroine also has that girl who always prevents her from achieving her goals. Meanwhile, the girl makes herself some hot tea and sits down next to the bed to carefully examine the game. When she and Rui created the game, she was in charge of the characters and story, and her friend was in charge of the programming. The girl was so engrossed in watching that she didn't even notice how the tea in her mug ran out. Afterwards, she lies down on her bed, satisfied, and thinks about how the current version of the game feels different than when they created it from scratch. At this moment, the girl remembers those happy times and decides to write to her friend again. However, in the past, even this moment in her life was overshadowed by sad events. Then Rui left her friend, despite all her attempts to prevent this. And if she gets into it again, she will only get new injuries and her hands will drop again. All this will once again plunge the girl into a state where she is abandoned by everyone and no one needs her. After this, she decides to go to bed, as she will have to get up early tomorrow. The girl wraps herself in a blanket and falls into a deep sleep, placing her phone next to her pillow. Suddenly, a notification from the game appears on it stating that a new survival mode has been opened. The next morning, the girl finally opens her eyes to the bright sun, which shines its rays directly into her face. After this, she jumps out of bed and thinks that she has overslept again, not knowing what time it is. However, everything around looks too unusual, and even the girl's appearance is very different from the one she fell asleep with. At this moment, she carefully looks around the room and tries to understand where she is. The girl gets up from the bed with bare feet and carefully walks forward, noticing her reflection in the mirror. She is very surprised by the image she sees, as she does not understand who it is at all. After this, she comes even closer to the mirror and realizes that this face seems familiar to her. Suddenly, a game window opens up to her, welcoming her to a new survival mode. After this, the girl receives a notification that in this mode, she is not playing the main character. The girl finally begins to understand the essence of everything that is happening, and she considers it some kind of joke. After all, she now plays the character of the story's main villain. Diana Hartfield. This news makes her legs give way and she falls to the floor right in front of the mirror. She can't believe that she will have to play as Diana and find herself inside her own creation. After this, she looks up, where she sees a notification that all characters have a negative affection rating from the start. However, everything is overshadowed by the fact that if you don't bring him to the plus, then the love interest will kill the girl. At this point, Diana realizes that this no longer feels like an Otomy game. For starting the survival mode, the girl is given a special item in the form of glass slippers. This gift impresses Diana, and she decides to come closer to take a closer look at it. After this, she takes one of the shoes in her hand, which shimmers brightly with magical iridescence. If Diana were to die in these shoes, she would be able to resurrect at exactly midnight. However, the girl sees such an item for the first time in this game, and is a little puzzled by it. Finally, she is asked to use the items wisely in order to survive, and after use they can disappear, having fulfilled their function. But Diana received too little information, and she still does not understand how many times she can use these shoes. The girl demands that the game tell her more, but no notifications come. After this, she realizes that she is left without any clues, inside a huge room. Diana spends the whole day in her bed until late at night. All this time she cries, as she is very afraid for her life in this game. She still feels like it's all just a dream and she might still wake up from this nightmare. Diana hopes that she will close her eyes and find herself back in her apartment in the morning. But the miracle does not happen, and she wakes up again in the castle, playing as a character from her own game. Suddenly someone starts knocking on the room, which really scares the girl. It turns out to be a servant who opens the door a little and wishes the lady good morning. She tells Diana that they are already waiting for her at breakfast, and she should get moving. This phrase puzzles the girl a little, but then she realizes that she has nothing at all to wear. After that, she goes to one of the closets to choose suitable clothes. Diana is very upset that the maids in this Otome game don't help their mistresses get dressed, but finally the preparations are finished, and she abruptly throws open the door of her room, heading off to breakfast. Meanwhile, the aristocrats living in this palace are already enjoying their meal in the dining room. Among them, there are also young men with blonde hair who have quite an attractive appearance. At this point, Diana finally finds the dining room and finds herself in full view of everyone present. She feels very nervous from the number of people who start looking at her. At this point, the woman sitting at the table calls her appearance indecent. As far as the girl remembers from the time of the game's creation, this is Diana's mother named Adele. And next to her is her stepfather, Owen Hartfield, who pays no attention to his stepdaughter at all. But the biggest problem is not them, but the love interests of this family in the person of her older half-brother, Glenn. And also in the half-younger brother, who is also sitting at the table, Ryan. As the system said, they all have a negative sympathy score at the initial stage. And if Diana can't do anything, then these two will soon be able to kill her. Suddenly, the girl's mother, Adele, turns to her and asks how long she plans to stand in the doorway. Diana asks for forgiveness and sits down at the table, where one of the servants pulls out her chair. However, she discovers that her breakfast plate is missing from in front of her. At this point, Adele announces that her daughter arrived too late and her food had already gotten cold. However, she no longer hoped that the girl would come at all, and Diana could only smile at this. After some time, she leaves the dining room in great anger, since even her status as an adopted daughter does not give her any right to treat her like that. Now it's no wonder why Diana became the villain in this game, with such a terrible attitude. After this, the girl finds the nearest chair and abruptly sits down on it in her fluffy dress. At this moment, she thinks that she herself is to blame for everything. After all, the image of Diana and her family itself was copied strictly from her life and from her relatives. Now it is no longer clear why she did it, since she has to experience this terrible attitude again. After this, she turns off all her thoughts and immerses herself in complete silence, being in her room. However, her peace is clouded by the fact that Diana is left without breakfast at all. At this point, she looks down at her shoes and again thinks that this is not a dream. Suddenly, someone starts knocking on the door of the room, and Diana allows the guest to enter. Her younger half-brother Ryan appears in front of her and invites his sister to join him for tea in the garden. After that, he smiles sweetly and says that it will be just the two of them. At this point, the girl decides that this could be her chance to fix the relationship between them. He decides to take a short break to catch his breath and prepare his answer. Immediately after this, Diana tells her brother that she would be very happy to join him. They go out into the garden together, where the girl admires the beautiful scenery and decorations of this place. Ryan touches one of the roses and tells his sister that it's not surprising. After all, it was only thanks to him and other gardeners that this garden became the pearl of the palace. Ryan Hartfield is one of the main character's love interests. At the same time, he is the main villain's half-younger brother and a smart young man beyond his years. At this moment, Diana wonders what he would do if he wanted to destroy her. Meanwhile, they find themselves at a table in the garden with their stepbrother, who tries to distract his sister from her deep thoughts. The girl sweetly apologizes for being lost in thought and asks again what Ryan was talking about. The maid places a mug of tea in front of him, and the young man invites his companion to play a game. The thing is that one of the cups in front of them has been laced with poison. No doubt this news leaves Diana very puzzled, and she still hopes that it is a joke. But Ryan goes on to explain that the point of the game is to guess where there is no poison, and thus win. He, in turn, promises to drink the cup that remains without a choice. Diana thinks all this is nonsense, but her half-brother is ready to forgive her if she wins. However, the girl sincerely does not understand why she needs to be forgiven. But Ryan's eyes at this moment are full of seriousness and focus on his sister. After this, he says that the previous situation probably didn't mean anything to her. At this moment, Diana silently looks at her brother and doesn't even know what to answer him. Suddenly, she looks at the circles and realizes that she will have to accept the terms of the game. After all, a board appears above the table, where she is asked to choose either the left or the right cup. Ryan notices his sister's confusion and asks if she is scared. But the girl advises her stepbrother to be afraid too, since she can choose unpoisoned tea. To this, Ryan replies that he is absolutely confident of his victory in this game of life. These words make Diana think because there is no difference in tea. While she is trying to find even the slightest discrepancy in the similarities between the cups, her stepbrother asks the girl to hurry up. At this moment, she remembers that she put on glass slippers, and even in case of death, she will be able to reboot. She decides to give her choice in favor of the right cup and remembers her decision. After this, Diana creates absolute calm on her face and takes a sip of tea. Suddenly, blood starts flowing out of her mouth, which is due to the poison. The girl tries to cover it with her hand and experiences real horror, realizing everything that is happening. At that moment, the ill-fated cup falls out of her hands and shatters into pieces. She falls to the ground with her while her brother calmly watches her torment. Diana looks up and the silhouette of her killer is reflected in her pupils. This was the last thing the girl managed to see before her first death. After this, time quickly begins to rewind, returning Diana to the past. Suddenly, she wakes up in her bed and screams at the whole nightmare that is happening. The girl looks around and realizes that she is still alive. The glass slippers worked and she rebooted at exactly midnight. She's lucky that it's just a game and there's a chance to be resurrected just like that. However, next time her mistake could be fatal and she will no longer have a chance. At this moment, she becomes immersed in her thoughts and realizes that not everything is so simple. After all, if Ryan drinks the cup that remains, he will deliberately poison himself. Knowing how smart and talented her stepbrother is, such an outcome would be stupid for him. Finally, Diana realizes that she will not save her life even if she chooses the left cup. In connection with this, the girl comes to the conclusion that she needs some kind of hint. After all, she read that by collecting them, the main character could avoid unpleasant events or come to a favorable outcome. This scheme should work here too, but all that remains is to figure out where the clue was. With its help, Diana will be able to choose the right cup and save her life. She just needs to win this stupid game, but how does she know which cup will be poisoned this time? However, she has an idea that would work in reality, but it is unknown whether it will work in the game. Diana finds herself back at the garden meeting with her stepbrother, and once again the board with the choice appears in front of her. This time she takes the left cup and brings it closer to herself along with the saucer. After this, the girl adds milk to the tea, which flows into it in a thin stream. Next, Diana takes a teaspoon and begins to stir the resulting mixture with it. At this moment, she takes out a blackened device and reports that there was poison in this very mug. Ryan and the maid are very surprised by the girl's resourcefulness. After this, he turns his gaze to the servant and begins to look at her sternly. The thing is, her brother is too smart to leave a silver spoon on the table. However, an hour ago, she took action that helped her in this test. Diana carefully entered the kitchen while the room was empty. After that, she noticed the dinnerware sets and began to examine them carefully. Finally, the girl finds what she was looking for, putting herself at great risk. On the tray are the very spoons that are prepared for tea drinking. At this moment, a board appears in front of her, offering to exchange the iron teaspoon for a silver one. It turns out that this was the very hint that the girl could use. By replacing the iron spoon with a silver one, she will not only save herself from death, but also raise Ryan's sympathy level. At this moment, the girl returns from her recent memories to reality and looks closely at her brother's scale. However, things are not as rosy as she imagined, because Ryan's score has dropped even lower. After this, he starts to smile and says that it looks like he lost this competition. But Diana still doesn't understand why everything happened this way and where she could have made a mistake. At this point, Rain brings the cup of poison to himself and tells him that according to the rules, he must drink it. This statement from her younger half-brother makes Diana very scared, and she asks him not to do it. She says that she allows Ryan not to drink this tea, but in that case he will not play such games anymore. In exchange for such kindness, the young man asks the girl to still enjoy the expensive tea that he prepared especially for this day. Diana agrees to such a reconciliation and says that she will do it with pleasure. After this, the girl brings the cup to her mouth and takes a sip of the prepared tea. Meanwhile, Ryan puts his hands together and doesn't even touch the cups. Diana's younger half-brother watches her closely, as if waiting for something. At this moment, she puts the mug of tea to her mouth and is about to take a sip. Diana is absolutely calm and continues to enjoy the pleasant taste, not anticipating any danger. However, the girl hears Ryan's contented voice and is puzzled by his strange behavior. After this, the young man begins to laugh and tells his sister that she drank it after all. This stunning news brings a look of intense horror to her eyes. At that moment, a trickle of blood began to flow from her mouth again. While the girl suffers from the effects of the poison, Ryan explains that she was doomed to lose in this game from the start. Diana raises her head and asks her brother in a weak voice what he means. After this, he places his cup full of tea on the table and begins his explanation. The thing is that from the very beginning there was poison in both mugs, and this did not give his sister any chance. Diana begins to experience a strong shock from this news, as she did not expect such a substitution. However, she doesn't understand why Ryan takes the second cup and calmly drinks from it. It turns out that before this he drank the antidote and nothing would have happened to him from drinking the tea. At this point, Diana realizes that her game is over and she has no more chances. However, Ryan adds that he will never forgive his sister for that barbaric act. Suddenly, time starts rewinding again and reboots the girl. After this, the hand on the clock in her room again points to 12 o'clock at night. The girl wakes up in horror as she realizes the futility of her attempts in this game. Whatever she chooses, it will not save her, and she is doomed to failure and death. Almost 2 hours pass, and it is deep night, but Diana still cannot sleep. After all, now she needs to come up with something other than a spoon that can help her. At that moment, she remembers Ryan's last words, that he would never forgive her for that act. Perhaps this is the very clue she needs to take. But now Diana has to remember everything that is connected with Ryan's character in this game. Suddenly, a thought pops into her head that could be the answer to this riddle. After this, the girl quickly runs to her closet with dresses and opens its doors. After a short time of searching, she finally finds the clothes she needs. The reason why Ryan hated Diana was because of the last dress left by his birth mother, Lyda Hartfield. Diana's mother refused to wear her current fiancé's late fiancé's clothes, so I just gave it to my daughter, who now holds it in her hands. Immediately after this, Diana decided to take this dress somewhere, but Ryan was secretly watching her. The girl didn't like that she was given a worn-out outfit, and in a fit of anger, she tore it. It's unlikely that Diana meant to offend anyone, but Ryan has held a grudge against her ever since. Suddenly, a board with some new notification appears in front of the girl again. In it, she is asked to sew Layla's dress, and Diana understands that this is the very clue. After that, she starts repairing something dear to Ryan and realizes that she never thought she would be able to mend something in the game. Her parents never bought her toys before, so Diana had to learn to sew them herself, and this could now save her life. Finally, a new day comes and someone knocks on the girl's room. It turns out to be Ryan, who again invites his sister to tea in the garden. Diana, following the old pattern, says that she will be very happy to join him. But suddenly she stops and tells her brother that she needs to stay late. The girl wants to dress up for the event and tells Ryan that she will catch up with him. The young man goes into the garden alone and sits down at the table waiting for his sister. Finally, she appears in a different dress and apologizes for the delay. At this moment, Ryan feels great surprise as he looks at Diana. The thing is that she wore to the meeting the very dress that once belonged to his late mother. However, her brother is not happy even after Diana specially sews the dress as an apology. After all, he doesn't believe that she did it with her own hands, since she probably forced some maid to do it. But Diana suggests that Ryan himself ask all the servants if they helped her with this. After this, the girl says that mending the dress is still not enough to forgive her. After all, she encroached on the only memento left after his mother's death and sincerely regrets it. Suddenly, Ryan's score changes for the better and is now -5%. Diana is glad that this is at least some progress, although she hasn't yet reached the plus. After this, Ryan turns away from the girl and says that he will accept forgiveness only after Diana proves everything with actions. The girl agrees to these conditions, but her brother again offers to play a deadly game. But Diana already knows that there is poison in both cups, and there is no point in choosing. She again performs actions with the spoon and tells the young man that this tea is poisoned. Now she needs to act decisively, and Diana looks closely into her cup. However, Ryan is very confused and does not understand what his sister is going to do. At this moment, the notification board appears in front of her again, but with different text. Diana chooses the option that everything is fine and now intends to go all the way. Ryan is very surprised to see his stepsister's unexpected behavior. After this, he begins to remember conversations behind his mother's back about her husband cheating on her. At that moment, he firmly grabs the hem of his mother's dress and asks her to pay attention to him. Ryan noticed her sad face, and it made him think that his mother was in pain. These words make her think, because the news of her husband's infidelity really brings her great pain. But she hugs her child and tells him that as long as she has children, she will not be sad. After this, Diana asks her younger half-brother if everything is okay with him. These words were constantly repeated by his late mother, and now they will help to play on his feelings. And it was not in vain that Ryan himself brought the girl to the very garden that Layla loved so much. The brother decided to use this place to take his revenge on the girl. However, she turns to Ryan again and tells him that everything is okay, thus reminding him of her dead mother. All these memories make the young man very worried and trembling. At this point, Diana is about to drink the tea from the cup and tells Ryan that if she succeeds, he will die. But her stepbrother puts his head down and asks the girl to stop doing this. However, Diana does not listen to his warnings and brings the cup of tea to her mouth. At this point, Ryan's sympathy meter reaches 0 and he tries to stop his sister from doing something irreversible. But it is too late to change anything, and the cup of poisoned tea falls out of the girl's hands, having fulfilled its mission. After a short period of time, Diana's room is illuminated by bright rays of sunlight. The girl opens her sleepy eyes and thinks that she has died again. At this moment, the sun is already setting outside her window, and a pink sunset spreads from it across the entire sky. It's not midnight at all, which means Diana didn't die and didn't reboot after that. Suddenly, the girl rises from the bed and sees that her half-brother Ryan is next to her. He holds his hand tenderly and reverently on her wrist, and even managed to fall asleep since he did not leave Diana for a minute after the poisoning. After this, she says her stepbrother's name and he immediately opens his eyes. The young man feels joy that his sister has finally woken up and is interested in her well-being. Diana says she's fine, but she doesn't understand how she survived the poison. The moment the girl lost consciousness, Ryan immediately ran to her and picked her up in his arms. After this, he decides not to waste time and takes out a bottle of antidote. Ryan opens his stepsister's mouth and begins to pour the translucent liquid into her. Since Diana didn't drink much poison, her body shouldn't have suffered much damage. Still, Ryan wonders why his sister decided to drink the tea, knowing that it was definitely poisoned. To this, Diana replies that she has decided to proudly accept the poison prepared for her, but Ryan thinks it's stupid that the girl would do such a thing, knowing that she would die. However, Diana can only earn her stepbrother's trust through actions, not sweet words. After her words, Ryan finally admits that the girl is not lacking in intelligence after all. He asks his sister to sleep peacefully and tells her that he has forgiven her for that terrible act. Ryan heads to the door and says goodbye to Diana, calling the girl by name. At this point, she notices that his likability score has risen to 3%. Diana can't believe it's the first time her brother has addressed her by name. Moreover, she was able to bring the percentage of sympathy out of minus, and now he will not try to destroy her. Finally, a new day comes in the game, and the roofs of the majestic palace buildings are illuminated by the bright rays of the sun. Since the day Diana woke up in the game world, she was able to get some sleep for the first time. At this moment, a servant enters her room and informs her that everyone is already waiting for her in the dining room. The girl kindly agrees with the servant, who again urges her to hurry. But on such a beautiful day, she doesn't even care about the rudeness of the staff. Meanwhile, her mother Adele again asks her to take away her daughter's breakfast, as she sleeps late. The servant immediately approaches the table and begins to clear away the plate, which no one has touched. But suddenly Diana appears in the dining room in a chic dress and asks not to take her breakfast away. Now the girl knows what time she needs to arrive in order to make it to breakfast. After this, she sits down at the table and asks her mother to no longer decide for her about breakfast. In addition, since Diana is the daughter of a duke, she asks for a decent education for herself. But Adele only laughs at her daughter's request, since she doesn't even observe table manners. At this moment, Diana takes her knife in her left hand and holds a piece of meat with a fork in her right hand. After this, she cuts off a piece of meat and elegantly brings it to her mouth. The whole family watches the girl's actions closely and begins to feel shock. The thing is, as a child in the real world, she learned manners by expecting her parents to invite her to eat with her, but that never happened. Although it is unknown how her behavior will work in the game, Diana does not intend to miss the opportunity to get an education. Meanwhile, the girl has a defender who takes her side. It turns out to be Ryan, who offers to take on his sister's education himself and then hire a tutor. At this point, the Duke announces that his son is right and that he intends to do just that. Diana is incredibly happy that she was allowed to get an education, and the Duke took her side. Afterwards, she secretly smiles at her step-little brother and thanks him for his help. Meanwhile, his approval rating increased to 7%. But Ryan has another brother, Glenn, and he still has a negative attitude towards Diana. After a while, the whole family finishes their morning meal and leaves the dining room. Ryan heads to his room and Diana waves goodbye to him while her older stepbrother stands behind her. He tells her that he expected from the daughter of a high-class slut that she would be able to easily seduce his brother. At this point, his sympathy percentage is incredibly low and reaches -19%. Apparently, he was greatly influenced by the fact that Ryan began to treat Diana differently. After this, the girl understands that she needs to be on guard, since Glenn's desire to destroy her is at its peak. On the same day, Diana decides not to postpone her studies and goes to Ryan. Their classes begin to take place regularly, and the girl gains new knowledge every day. Her notebooks accumulate a huge number of notes from each lesson. One day after class, Ryan tells Diana that the lesson is over and he is heading to the capital. The thing is, he needs to buy flower bulbs for his beautiful garden. At this moment, the girl thinks about a trip to the capital and an idea comes to her mind. Diana decides not to miss her chance and she asks to go with her stepbrother. Ryan thinks about it and decides that with the help of this trip, he will be able to introduce his sister to the knowledge of botany. And on this beautiful, clear day, they get into their carriage and set off for the capital. During the trip, Diana constantly looks out the window, admiring the local scenery. After this, the girl decides to ask Ryan why he buys flower bulbs himself and does not ask the gardener to do it. The younger half-brother adjusts his glasses and explains that Diana thinks like an amateur. First, Ryan has to make sure the bulbs are fresh himself. And second, gardeners always want to buy something new, not a specific type of flower. At this point, Diana remembers that her half-brother had deliberately not changed the decor in the garden all this time. The reason is that he wants to preserve the appearance of the garden as it was under Layla. Meanwhile, the carriage is already approaching the gates of the capital and stops near them. Ryan helps Diana outside and orders her not to go far from him, otherwise she could easily get lost. She agrees and sees how many people are on the street and going about their business. The young man asks if this is her first visit to the royal capital of Vinklum, and the girl says that it is. Afterwards, she thanks Ryan for taking her with him and he replies that it's nothing. The main thing is that the girl simply doesn't leave him and doesn't get lost. However, as soon as the young man finished saying these words, he notices that Diana has disappeared somewhere. Ryan tries to find the missing girl in the crowd, but he can't find her anywhere. Meanwhile, she puts on a hooded robe to avoid being discovered by her brother. After all, Diana didn't come here just like that, and besides Glenn, there are other love interests whose sympathy rate she will have to find out. There is one character who should not have any hatred towards Diana. It is with him that the girl will be able to survive in this game and ensure her safety. While Diana continues her careful search through the many streets of the capital, someone's hand appears from an alley. She reaches out to the girl and suddenly she notices his movements near her. After this, someone's male hand grabs her wrist and pulls her along. At this moment, an unknown young man closes Diana's eyes and asks her to guess who he is. The girl experiences great anxiety as she understands that she has fallen into the hands of the worst of the worst. It could have been anyone but that same Neil who was now standing behind her. After her answer, the young man frees the girl and tells her that she guessed right. Neil asks how Diana ended up in the capital, and she replies that she came here with her younger brother to go shopping. This news upsets the man a little, as he expected that the girl came for him. After his words, she apologizes to the young man for not living up to his expectations. Neil continues to talk to the girl and asks how she is doing. At this point, Diana notices that his affection stat is -30%. A board appears in front of her again with a choice where she can bully or not bully the boy. The girl understands that she has no clues, and any option dooms her to death. After this, she raises her gaze to the young man and examines him carefully. This is Neil Campbell, one of Diana's love interests and also a childhood friend. In the past, they once sat together under a tree and played chess with each other. Then the third son of the Marquis Campbell checked her and won the game. His fate was similar to Diana's, as they were both children of a new, unloved wife and were bullied by their older brothers and sisters. So they were able to become friends easily, but if the girl knew why he really treats her like that. After this, Neil brings the girl back to reality and asks how long he should wait for an answer. The young man assumes that Diana simply decided not to talk about her life. However, she corrects him and tells him that everything is not at all as he thinks. After all this time, the girl thinks that if she gives an answer, she will die again. Meanwhile, Ryan is actively searching for his sister among a huge crowd of people. Suddenly, Diana hears his voice and immediately turns towards her brother. Neil at this point says that he is very sorry because her brother is going to steal her. But Diana does not understand what the young man means and asks him again. At this point, he silently walks past her so as not to catch Ryan's eye. Suddenly, she hears her brother's voice behind her, shouting that he has finally found his sister. After this, he immediately approaches the girl and asks what she is doing there alone. However, Diana is surprised by his question, since just a second ago Neil was next to her. But he had already managed to disappear unnoticed, and there was no one else nearby except Ryan and Diana. The girl's younger stepbrother begins to get angry because he asked her not to leave him anywhere. At this moment, Diana realizes that everything would have ended badly if Ryan had not been there. Neil would definitely take advantage of the opportunity and kill the girl in this alley. While Diana stands with her back to her brother, he continues to try to get an answer from her. At this moment, she suddenly sits down on her knees, which causes confusion in her brother's eyes. After this, she tells Ryan that she is fine and that she just realized a lot. After all, it was thanks to her younger half-brother that she was able to survive today. Diana decides to apologize to the young man for her disappearance and for the fact that he had to run around looking for her. Ryan extends his hand to the girl and asks her to leave this dark alley as quickly as possible. She decides that her brother is afraid of the dark, but he denies it in every possible way and says that his sister is making it all up. After this, they finally finish their shopping and load the bulbs onto the cart. Ryan and Diana board the carriages and head back home, having finished all their business in the capital. At this moment, the girl thinks about Neil's words, which he told her before the terrible choice. Every Wednesday he walks in the main square by the fountain and invites Diana to join him next time and chat. The girl understands that sooner or later she will still have to face him. Meanwhile, Ryan begins to reproach Diana for the fact that they wasted a lot of time because of her search. The young man's sister says that she is very sorry about this, and her brother asks her to write an essay in which she sincerely repents. This task surprises the girl very much, but she has to agree and specify the deadline by which she must submit it. At this moment, something unexpected happens and the carriage stops abruptly. All the horses suddenly rear up, as they were clearly very frightened of something. The whole point is that robbers jumped out onto the road and intended to attack the cavalry. Diana is very upset by this, but Ryan asks his sister not to leave the carriage for safety. He is calm because they are guarded by experienced bodyguards, and there is no need to worry about the outcome of the battle. After this, one of the guards approaches the carriage and knocks on the door with his fist. The man tells Ryan that they finished the fight and detained a couple of the bandits, and the rest managed to escape. The young man praises the bodyguards for their excellent work and finally decides to go outside. However, something really catches his attention and makes him think seriously. He notices a sword on the ground and realizes that there are many strange things about this attack. After all, thieves usually rob trade caravans, but here they decided to attack the Duke's carriage with an armed escort. Besides, their swords are too good for common thieves, and these words lead Diana to a terrible assumption. After this, Ryan reports that someone specifically hired these bandits to kill them. At this moment, he has a bad feeling, and the young man decides to return home as soon as possible. By evening, they finally reach the place, and a servant runs out to meet them, telling them about a terrible incident. The man tries to catch his breath after being in a great hurry, and Ryan asks him to tell him the gist of what happened. After this, he begins his story in detail, and sweat appears on his face from excitement. The events described by the servant cause great horror on the faces of Ryan and Diana. After all, everything that happened is only the beginning of a new terrible test. Meanwhile, in the game, the entire sky is covered with dark clouds and it starts to rain. One of the main character's love interests looks up and covers his face with his hand from the drops. In this position, he continues to stand in the rain and look at the dark sky. Just a couple of hours ago, the sky was absolutely clear, and a falcon was flying calmly across it. All the action takes place in the lands of the Hartfield family, where a certain young man trains his bird. After its flight, the falcon lands on Glenn's hand and he praises it for its good performance. But suddenly, the bird begins to get very agitated, and the young man tries to understand what is causing this behavior. Meanwhile, a bright spark appears from the dark forest and quickly heads towards them. It turns out to be a sharp arrow trying to reach its insidious target. Glenn notices the danger in front of him, and an indescribable horror appears on his face. After this, Ryan and Diana are informed that the young man was seriously injured during a falcon hunt. But in fact, the servants embellished everything again, and the heir to the house was left with only an ordinary scratch from an arrow. Glenn has already used the ointment for the wounds, and there shouldn't even be a scar left on his hand. It turns out that not only flowers grow in the garden, but also medicinal herbs from which Ryan makes various medicines. After this, Glenn turns his attention to Diana and asks with a displeased look what she is doing here. The girl replies that coming and visiting the victim is not a crime, but her older brother says that it does not concern her. At this point, Ryan intervenes in the conversation and says that this also concerns Diana. After all, when they were returning from the capital, they were attacked by a group of armed men. This news greatly disconcerts Glenn, and he abruptly gets up from his chair. After this, the servant brings Ryan the arrow that wounded his older brother. He begins to examine it carefully and says that such arrows are used in the army. It is obvious that they were attacked by real killers, and someone seriously wants to kill their entire family. Glenn sighs in resignation and reports that past events are repeating themselves again. Ryan agrees with him completely, but Diana doesn't understand what he's talking about. The girl asks her brothers to share information and keep her up to date. At this point, her younger brother asks if his sister knows what their family is called behind their backs. After this, he explains that all people consider them a bloody duchy. These words greatly shock Diana, and she tries to find out what this is connected with. It turns out that in the kingdom, they are considered one of the two most powerful and influential families. However, they gain this glory by doing the dirty work to get the crown. But the more power, the more envious people, and those who want to avenge the death of a close family member. After these words, Glenn asks Diana to finally understand what it means to be a member of their family. He then adds that all this is just the tip of the iceberg, and Diana can't find anything to say. As Glenn said, this was only the beginning, as the maid who checked their food was found poisoned by the meat. After this, in the dead of night, they tried to burn down the Hartfield family's house, but the criminal was never found. Day after day, all members of the family were driven into a corner, and Adele even stopped going to breakfast. One such day, Diana asks the Duke where her mother is. Owen replies that she locked herself in her room out of fear and even refuses food and water. Glenn begins to mock his stepmother, who is shaking in horror, but his father corrects him. His son asks for forgiveness, and Ryan explains that such behavior is natural for a person who has encountered such an attitude towards their family for the first time. However, he is surprised that Diana is not shaking with fear at all, and she explains that she is stronger than she seems. In fact, the mystery of her courage lies in the fact that the girl has already encountered death more than once. After breakfast, the girl makes a beautiful ponytail on her head and comes to the conclusion that all these events began after meeting Neil. She didn't find any clues in the mansion, which meant it was time to look for them outside of it. Diana immediately sets out to find a way to finally get out of this vicious circle. At this point, the two brothers notice her leaving through the window, and Ryan explains to Glenn that his sister wants to start her own investigation into the attacks on their family. But the older brother thinks this is childish and doesn't think that his sister will be able to do anything worthwhile. After that, he pats Ryan on the head and asks him at least not to get involved in this, as it could be dangerous. Glenn also advises his brother to let his elders figure things out for themselves. However, Ryan notes that his older brother does nothing for this, and he is a member of the Hartfield family and also wants to take care of her honor and safety. But Glenn doesn't agree with his intentions, as the guy is still too young for this. Very soon, the older brother will become the head of the family and will protect them using completely different methods. However, he understands that it is impossible to completely eradicate these cases, and after these words, he leaves. Ryan is left alone and says that he is not going to sit back and watch what is happening to this house. Meanwhile, one of the main character's love interests comes to see the king. The Overlord reports that the Hartfield family has once again been attacked by assassins. And as a token of gratitude for all they have done for the kingdom, he wants to send the best of his knights to protect them. At this point, the man bows his head and says that he will humbly carry out any order. After this, the king replies that he relies on the head of the royal knights and entrusts him with this task. At this time, it is already 3 o'clock in the afternoon in the Hartfield family, and everything is still calm. The bright sun is shining outside the window, illuminating the rooms of the house with its rays. However, Lady Adele is still in great terror and shaking with fear. At this point, the whole family gathers together in the living room, where everyone sits opposite each other. Diana turns to her father and decides to find out who they are waiting for, but the Duke replies that she will soon understand everything herself. At that very moment, a knight appears on the threshold, asking for forgiveness for the intrusion. Diana turns her head in his direction and realizes that this is another love interest. It turns out to be Elliot Lane, who also has a negative sympathy rating for the girl. This man is the head of the Order of Royal Knights and has unique talents. From a young age, he was called a genius of fencing, and after joining the order, he began to stand out for his fighting skills. However, Glenn is not at all happy with the appearance of the knight, whom he calls the offspring of the Lane family. Diana finds her brother's behavior and words to be completely inhospitable, especially towards the youngest commander-in-chief in the history of the order. In the entire state, there are only 2 great ducal families that are in good standing with the kingdom. This is the Hartfield and Lane family, who are always competing and don't particularly like each other. At this point, Elliot announces that he has arrived in the duchy as the head of the Order of Royal Knights. The reason is that the king ordered that their family be kept safe and secure. After this, Adele's spirit was lifted, since they would be protected by the most brilliant knight. However, the children are unhappy with their mother's reaction, which even changed dramatically in her face. After this, Elliot swears on behalf of the royal knights that he will find the culprit and put an end to the attacks on their family. However, there is one oddity associated with all these crimes, which in essence are not unusual. But the criminals know exactly when to attack the family, as if they can see every step they take. All members of Hartfield at this moment focus their gaze on the knight and continue to listen to him attentively. After all his assumptions lead to the fact that there is a traitor in their house. After these words, everyone starts looking at each other, suspecting one particular person. At this point, Diana feels uneasy, since she is not really guilty of anything. However, how to prove her innocence to people who have a negative sympathy rating towards her? At this point, Elliot explains that the traitor could be a family member or a servant. But now the protection of their home is under the jurisdiction of the knightly order, and they have nothing to worry about. After this, all the family members leave the living room, and Diana is the last one to leave. The girl realizes that the situation is now taking a radical turn. At this moment, she goes to the window and thinks about something intently. Suddenly, something happens that greatly surprises Diana and makes her turn around. Ryan notices her sister's concern, and she reports that she felt a cold breeze. But the strange thing is that the windows were closed all this time. A couple of days later, the Hartfield mansion is filled with knights from the order. In such an atmosphere, it is very difficult to look for new clues without arousing suspicion. However, today, Diana was still able to find something and place this item in front of her on the table. The girl managed to sneak into one of the rooms and found a box on one of the shelves. When she took it out, dust covered Diana from head to toe, since no one had touched this box for a long time. The girl opens the lids and finds a dagger there, after which the game board offers her to take it. But now Diana doesn't know how he can be useful to her and whether she will have to fight with anyone at all. Moreover, if you take into account her fighting skills, then having a dagger turns out to be pointless. Nevertheless, Diana decides to get to know the find better and begins to open the case. The girl decides that her next target will be Elliot, since his sympathy percentage allows her to lure the knight to her side. With Glenn, the situation is more complicated, so for now it's worth focusing on the person who can protect her. After this, Diana ties the dagger to her leg and decides not to just sit in the room and tremble with fear. At this point, she gets up from the couch and decides to meet her love interest in person. She leaves the room and informs the knight's guard that she plans to go to the restroom. Diana walks around the entire mansion and does not find the person she needs, so she decides to go to the garden. But even there, the girl can't find anything of interest, although she has already managed to look around everything. At this moment, she finds herself in a small clearing in the middle of a large forest. Suddenly, the ground beneath her begins to collapse and form a small hole. However, with every second, this hole becomes deeper and gradually sucks Diana in. A strong horror appears in the girl's eyes as she can no longer get out of there. After this, the ground finally disappears from under her feet and Diana falls deep down. She realizes that she is trapped by someone and doesn't know what to do now. The girl reaches her hand up and tries to reach the surface, but all her efforts are in vain. But at that moment, a man comes to her aid and grabs her by the wrist. After this, he begins to lift Diana, who is frightened by everything that is happening, to the surface. Finally, the girl can already make out the face of her savior and understands that it is Elliot in front of her. After Diana is back on top, the knight inquires about her well-being. She replies that she is fine and immediately focuses her gaze on Elliot. His likability rating remains negative at -15%. The reason for this lies in an incident that occurred about a year ago. During the journey to the royal palace, Hartfield's carriage was attacked, but the Knights of the Order saved their lives. Despite all their help, Diana behaved with extreme disrespect towards them. Instead of showing compassion for the wounded knights, she called it an abomination. After this, the girl turns to her carriage and says that she cannot look at this. Instead of gratitude, she refuses to help the knights in any way and leaves them alone. It is not surprising that after such an act, Elliot began to dislike Diana. In this regard, the current Diana is interested in why the head of the knightly order decided to save her. To this, Elliot replies that he is simply following His Majesty's orders and ensuring the safety of his family members. After that, he asks what Diana forgot in this place, and she replies that she was looking for him. Elliot sighs resignedly and explains that he received a report about the girl's long absence, and her behavior looks terrible from the outside. Her selfish actions suggest that Diana is the culprit of everything that is happening. She replies that she didn't want it to happen, and at that moment, the sound of a falling dagger appears near them. This is the very weapon that the girl attached to her leg and which fell to the ground at such an inopportune moment. Elliot notices the dagger and begins to demand an explanation from Diana about it. The girl starts to smile innocently and says that it is just for defense. However, the knight does not believe Diana and his sympathy level becomes even lower. She didn't expect such a turn of events and such a sharp loss of sympathy points. After this, Elliot says that he will definitely ask Diana about her weapon later. Now it is much more important to examine the hole into which the girl fell. It is already evening and the knight takes the lantern in his hand, asking the knights about their find. At this moment, they are on the surface with Diana and are waiting for at least some news. Finally, the warriors report that this is a system of secret passages and the ceiling has collapsed from old age. Footprints were also found and Elliot understands how the criminals could have entered the area undetected. After this, he praises his knights for their excellent work and suggests continuing the inspection tomorrow. At this moment, a notification appears in front of Diana that thanks to her, Elliot learned about the secret passage. It is late night and the Hartfield house begins to empty as everyone prepares for bed. Meanwhile, Diana remembers her discovery of the dagger and how she considered it a clue. But then she discovered a system of secret passages and still doesn't understand how these two things can be connected. After all, because of the dagger, her sympathy percentage dropped and now it's unclear why it's needed. One more wrong move like that in front of Elliot could lead to Diana's death. At this moment, the girl grabs her head and suddenly discovers a man opening the doors to the living room. This person turns out to be one of the maids, who should not be wandering around the house at such a time. Taking a closer look, Diana realizes that this is her personal servant, who is not fulfilling her duties towards her at all. After this, the girl becomes interested in what the maid has planned and what she is doing in general. However, the system does not give any options to get closer, and Diana decides not to get involved in this for now. The girl goes to her room and lies down on her bed to read a book. Suddenly, someone starts knocking on her door and Diana looks warily in that direction. At this moment, her personal maid appears in the room and apologizes for such a late visit. She informs the lady that the head of the nightly order is waiting for her in the living room and wants to discuss something. Diana is a little surprised by such a request, but understands that it is connected with the question about the dagger. After a while, they go with the maid to the living room, where there is no light at all. The servant asks Diana to go ahead, and at the same time she closes the door and also finds herself inside. However, the girl discovers that there is no one else in the living room except them. At this point, the maid begins to smile and announces that the mistress has come to the right place. After this, Diana seems to fall into a dark pool and does not understand what happened to her. She tries to remember the last events in which the maid came to her room. After some time, the maid brings her into the living room, where there is no one and the light is not on. The maid then picked up a large vase and swung it to hit Diana on the head. Finally, the girl was able to wake up after a severe injury and opens her eyes. At that moment, she sees that she is in the forest and there are several robbers in front of her. Diana finds herself on the ground, surrounded by many bandits who taunt her. After this, she starts screaming and demands an explanation from these men about what they did to her. Their leader asks the girl to calm down and says that he is not going to kill her. At this point, he turns to Cindy, who turns out to be Diana's personal maid. He asks if anyone has noticed the loss, and the maid replies that no one cares about this girl. Diana understands that she is at a disadvantage, and her absence, at best, will be noticed in the forest. Moreover, she realizes that the rat all this time was this very maid. Cindy replies that serving a mistress that no one cared about was not difficult, and she could do whatever she wanted. But Diana doesn't understand how this maid could carry her out of the mansion without anyone noticing. However, there is something that no one knows yet, and it really helped the bandits. The thing is that there are secret passages throughout the mansion, through which Cindy carried the girl out. This news brings horror and indescribable shock to Diana's eyes. It turns out that the boss created several passages so that he could simply escape in an emergency. One of them is located in the living room behind a large wall portrait that opens easily. After Cindy turned off Diana, the bandits entered the house through this secret passage and kidnapped the girl. Then the leader of the group took the girl away through the same passage he used to enter the living room. All this was not at all difficult to do. You just had to wait until the guards were not in the girl's wing. At this point, Diana realizes that the maid was near the living room door before her abduction to eavesdrop on the guards' conversation. Cindy is surprised by the lady's intelligence and says that she is not as stupid as she thought. After this, Diana remembers the moment when a cold wind blew into the living room. At that time, all the windows were closed, and this phenomenon seemed rather strange to her. It turns out that this wind was blowing from a secret passage, behind which at that moment a maid was standing and eavesdropping on everything. After some time, Cindy takes out her pocket watch and says that it is already 9 o'clock. The thing is that all this time they are waiting for someone, but this person is late. At this moment, Diana remembers that before leaving the room, she managed to put on the crystal shoes, and if she dies, nothing terrible will happen. Suddenly, one of the bandits falls face down on the ground and loses consciousness. The kidnapped girl turns her attention to him and tries to understand what happened to him. Meanwhile, the leader of the bandits remains completely calm and welcomes the guest who has appeared. At that moment, Elliot, whom they had been waiting for all this time, appears in front of them. Cindy grabs Diana's hand to prevent her from escaping, and the bandit leader says that he had no doubt that the knight would appear. To this, Elliot replies that the bandits underestimate him, since he had his eye on the girl from the very beginning. However, the bandit says that coming to them alone was a bad idea. After this, he rises from his seat and throws his large sword over his shoulder. But the head of the knightly order also prepared his weapon and asks the enemy not to worry about it. After all, his skills and talents allow him to fight a large number of bandits alone. At this point, the girls stand behind the men as they begin to advance on Elliot. A battle begins in the deep forest and the opponents actively cross their swords. Elliot performs a strike and attacks the first enemy, dealing heavy damage. After this, he begins to attack the rest of the bandits who lined up around him. After a short amount of time, all enemies are defeated and now only the leader remains. Elliot waits for the moment when his opponent is open and strikes him with his sword. After this, a deep cut remains on the robber's body, and he reports that the knight is quite good in battle. At this moment, the man falls to the ground and no longer shows any signs of life. Elliot stops next to his body as his face is illuminated by the fire's flames. Now all the enemies are defeated and only the maid and Diana remain in front of them. The traitor takes out her dagger and holds it to the girl's neck, ordering the knight to stand still. However, Elliot informs her that it is all over now and that if she surrenders, she can save her life. But Cindy does not agree with him, because if the knight came to this place, then their plan was successful. Elliot doesn't understand what the maid means and tries to find out from her. It turns out that all this was a decoy and now the main forces are storming the mansion. These words cause shock on the faces of Elliot and Diana as they realize the full horror of what is happening. Rumors that the commander of the knightly order was always eager to fight turned out to be true and played into the hands of the bandits. However, Elliot reports that there is a whole squad of knights in the mansion and they will definitely cope with the assault. But Cindy explains that they can't do this without clear instructions from the commander. All this will create chaos that the knights will not be able to cope with and will be defeated. At this point, a board appears in front of Diana, asking her to ask Elliot to save her or leave. The girl does not understand how best to act and decides to ask the knight for salvation. After this, Elliot turns his gaze to Diana and intends to fulfill her request. Cindy sees the knight rushing towards them and pressing the dagger even harder to the girl's neck. She demands that the man not come near them, otherwise Diana will be seriously hurt. The maid's eyes show a strong confidence in what she is about to do, so Elliot takes his time making a decision. Suddenly, horror appears on his face at the picture he has to witness. At that moment, Diana feels a sharp pain from the cut pierce her neck. She tries to cover the wound with her hand, and Elliot jumps from his seat towards her. And again, time begins to rewind, rebooting Diana to the previous point. It's midnight again, which means she survived again and she'll have to revise her script. At this moment, the girl wakes up in her bed and screams in horror. Having woken up, she immediately begins to touch her neck, on which there is no longer a trace of the cut. Although the feeling of horror and excitement has not yet gone away, Diana understands that she is alive and everything is fine with her. After this, she looks out the window and does not understand how much longer this will continue. The next day, she decides to take a walk in the garden and tries to understand which choice would be the right one. However, in Ryan's case, no matter what she chose, it ended in death anyway. Without the right hints, she would not have been able to cope with this test. At this point, Diana remembers Elliot's affection meter and realizes that it would be better to focus on that now. Only this time, it wasn't her love interest who killed her, but the mansion's personal maid. However, even if Diana apologizes to Elliot for her rude behavior, it will not be enough. On top of that, she has a feeling she's missing something since the dagger lowered Elliot's affection meter. At this moment, someone comes up to the girl from behind and lightly hits her on the top of her head with a book. It turns out to be Ryan, who noticed his sister in the garden, muttering something under her breath. He came there to enjoy the peace and quiet and read a book in peace. Diana apologizes for disrupting her brother's plans and says that she is ready to leave and not interfere with him. However, Ryan sits down next to her and says that he didn't ask her to leave and that the girl is acting strange today. Diana does look very worried, but she tells her brother not to worry. After this, she explains that he shouldn't be overly polite and that she understands perfectly well how much he hates her. At this point, Ryan hangs his head and says that his sister is right and he did treat her badly. However, now everything has changed and these words cause surprise on his sister's face. Of course, he couldn't stand her before and thought that playing at being a family with Diana was complete nonsense. But he was wrong because he didn't really know Diana, and he should have given her a chance from the very beginning. After this, Ryan adds that his sister can always share with him what is important to her. Diana silently clutches the hem of her dress with her fist and realizes that for the first time in her life she was able to hear these words. Tears appear on her face, and she begins to thank her brother for his concern. At this point, his sympathy rate increases to 12%. After this, he asks her to share her experiences, and she wipes the tears from her eyes. Diana gets ready to talk and tells Ryan that she will need his help. After some time, she goes into the forest, counting on her brother's help. Now she just needs to find the hidden passage and tell Elliot about it. But now she's going to be more careful and not fall into this trap a second time. At this moment, she sees one of the knights nearby and asks him to call the commander. Elliot doesn't keep us waiting long and sends his warriors out to inspect the passage again. A sign appears in front of Diana again, saying that thanks to her, the head of the knightly order found a secret passage. After some time, she returns back to the mansion and the maid goes into her room. She announces that dinner is ready and the whole family is waiting for her at the table. After this, she leaves the lady alone, who is very surprised that she was called so early. This may be because the secret passage was found in the morning and the route immediately changed. In this case, Diana decides that now is the time to take the dagger with her. The girl ties it tightly to her leg and covers it with the hem of her dress. Now she is serious about catching the maid red-handed and handing her over to Elliot. This way she can kill two birds with one stone, and with these thoughts she goes to dinner. Diana carefully opens the door and looks inside the room, looking for any obvious danger. The girl realizes that Cindy is already inside the passage and it's time to expose her. She approaches the secret door behind the large portrait in the living room and begins to open it. After this, she discovers a maid who is descending down the steps of a secret passage. Diana orders the girl to stand still and tells her that she knows everything about her plans. Suddenly, there is a sharp weapon near her neck again, and the man says that it does not concern her. At this point, he offers Cindy to take her hostage, and Diana tries to figure out where he came from. The girl clenches her fist tightly and thinks that this is another failure for her. After this, she reports that it happened earlier than planned, but the lady must go with them. Cindy closes the door behind her as Diana looks towards the exit with a hopeless expression. However, she now has an advantage, as she has a dagger under her dress. After some time, Diana again finds herself in the middle of the forest, surrounded by bandits. Their leader didn't expect that she would be able to discover the secret passage so easily. But Diana doesn't think she's too smart because she failed to spot the rat before her death. Moreover, it was a mistake to expect that she would be able to catch her red-handed so easily. But apparently this event, just like the tea party with Ryan, cannot be avoided. After this, the leader of the robbers says that now they will wait for the prince, who will gallop after the girl on a white horse. Diana realizes that everything is going according to their plan, and Elliot is already rushing there, after which he will begin a battle with the bandits. However, at the same time, the storming of the mansion will begin, and the girl will have to make a decisive choice. She clenches her fist tightly again, as she finds no clues in this situation. Suddenly, an idea comes to Diana and she decides to take advantage of her only chance. Meanwhile, Elliot already appears on the scene and the maid grabs the girl by the hand again. And the head of the knightly order takes out his sword to fight his opponents again. At this point, Diana finally realizes that Elliot's low sympathy percentage is due to the fact that he had already betrayed the safety of his friends once. This happened exactly when the girl treated their feet with disdain. At that moment, he did it for Diana, who did not even appreciate the life and health spent on her protection. Finally, the moment comes when Elliot has dealt with all the bandits and focuses his gaze on the girls. Cindy again holds the cold dagger to Diana's throat and orders the knight to stay away from them. However, Diana understands that Elliot will not make the same mistake again and will not want to save her. So she decides to help herself and asks the knight not to worry about her safety. But Elliot is very surprised by her choice and does not understand why the girl made such a decision. At this moment, Diana lifts the hem of her dress and is about to take out the hidden dagger from there. She tells the knight that she will take care of herself and swings her weapon at the maid. A look of shock appears on Cindy's face as she did not expect this turn of events. Diana holds a dagger in front of her, and the board with the choice that has appeared is reflected in her pupils. In it, she is asked to cut off her hair, which the maid grabbed. At this moment, she realizes that if she had had the dagger from the beginning, she would have been able to avoid death. After this, she makes the right choice and cuts her hair without thinking. Diana is finally freed from Cindy's grasp, leaving her with only a shock of her curls. Meanwhile, Elliot watches everything closely and cannot take his eyes off this spectacle. The maid understands that she is left with nothing, but she can no longer do anything in this situation. After the girl frees herself from the villain's hands, she immediately heads towards the knight. He manages to grab her hand and demands that she immediately run behind him to protect herself. At this time, the head of the knightly order pounces on the servant and swings his sword at her. He decides to leave the girl alive, so he hits her in the back of the head with the hilt of his sword. Diana is glad that she managed to avoid death, but it turns out that the clue must be picked up only at a certain moment. Otherwise, it will simply disappear, which makes this game even more unbearable. After this, the girl tells Elliot that it is time for them to return to the mansion as her family is in danger. At this moment, the knight's white horse begins to rush home at breakneck speed. Diana sits behind Elliot and holds on tightly to his body to keep from falling off the horse. She presses herself tightly against his back and suddenly sincerely asks for forgiveness for her actions. However, Elliot reveals that it is not her fault that she was taken hostage, but Diana apologizes for the incident that happened a year ago with his wounded comrade. The knight remembers this day very well and decides to ask Diana why she treated him like that. Now, in order for Elliot to accept the girl's apology, he must find out the real reason for what happened. This reason lies in her past, when Diana was still a very young girl. In truth, she had been wary of men since childhood, and it was not her fault. The girl's mother was an elite prostitute, so their house was often visited by various clients. Among them were those who beat the girl until she was bleeding for the sake of ordinary fun. Her mother didn't see anything wrong with it either and had fun with the client, watching her daughter with laughter. Since then, any sight of blood brings back bad memories for Diana, which is why she reacted this way to the wound of the man who protected her. After this, the head of the knightly order says that she should not apologize to him for her actions. Diana realizes that Elliot is right, because his comrade only wanted to protect the girl. In this regard, she promises the knight to apologize to that warrior and notices that his sympathy stat has improved. It's deep night outside and a bright crescent moon appears in the sky, but in the meantime, terrible things are happening in the mansion. The entire building is on fire, and the knights are trying to protect the Hartfield family from the attack of bandits. They cross their swords with their opponents and fight bravely, risking their lives. At this moment, Elliot appears at the scene of the battle and orders his companion to stay put and rely on him. After this, he turns to his warriors and orders them to listen to his leadership. He reports that he is late, but the Order of Knights has no enemy that it cannot defeat. With these words, Elliot raises his sword up and thus inspires his soldiers before the battle. While the knights rejoice at the appearance of their commander-in-chief, Diana quietly tries to sneak somewhere. She disobeys Elliot's order because she urgently needs to go somewhere. The girl walks around the burning house and finds herself in front of a gazebo located in the garden. After this, she makes a loud cough, thereby signaling to someone about her presence. At that moment, Ryan appears in front of her and tells his sister that he has everything ready. 10 hours earlier, the girl asked her brother to help her. She was worried by the maid's words that without their commander, the knights would not be able to repel a sudden attack. Because of this, they will need a lot of medicine for the wounded, a supply of which only Ryan can produce. At that moment, a board suddenly appears in front of her with the choice to ask her brother for help, and she realizes that he was the main detail of this origin from the very beginning. After this, Diana turns to Ryan and asks him to make the healing ointment in maximum quantity. He says he can do it, but he doesn't understand why his sister needs so many medications. The girl explains that they don't know when the opponents will make their next move and how many people will suffer. Ryan understands that caution won't hurt them, and in the midst of the battle, he tells his sister that everything is ready. Diana expresses her deep gratitude to him, since their salvation depends on it. At this moment, her stepbrother notices the cut hair and asks the girl what happened to her. Diana says that a lot has already happened and she didn't want to worry her brother. Ryan is glad that his sister is at least not injured, and after this conversation, they move on to the most important thing. After this, he opens the door to the room and invites Diana to go inside. The girl looks up and discovers a variety of medicinal plants. At this moment, Ryan places a box on the table in front of her, which contains all the healing ointments. He agrees with his sister's words that the enemies made their move when they didn't even suspect it. The girl thanks Ryan for his work and asks him to help take all these medicines to the wounded soldiers. Her brother doesn't even hesitate and says that he will definitely help her in this matter. Meanwhile, the mansion building is increasingly ablaze with fire, which does not even think of decreasing. Many wounded warriors are at the wall, trying to stop the bleeding from their injuries. At this point, several defeated bandits are tied with rope and immobilized. Elliot is glad that they managed to fight back, but his soldiers took a beating in this battle. Suddenly, Diana and Ryan appear among them, asking about the number of wounded. The head of the knightly order turns his head towards the girl in surprise and does not understand what is happening. Diana explains to him that she wants to help the victims, and Elliot replies that there are 30 wounded here. After this, the girl puts the box of medicines on the ground and takes out one of the ointments. He walks up to one of the wounded soldiers and takes his injured arm to treat it. Elliot watches with great surprise the actions of Diana, who this time decided to help his warriors. He decides not to remain indifferent either and asks the girl what he can do. At this point, Ryan joins the conversation and asks the knight to follow his instructions, handling the jars of ointment carefully. After this, he adds that he should thank his sister, since she thought everything through 2 steps ahead and was prepared for this outcome. Meanwhile, she continues to run around with a box of ointments and tries to help each soldier as quickly as possible. Elliot is amazed by the girl's selflessness and the fact that she took care of the health of his knights in advance. While Diana is treating the wound of another injured soldier, more people appear near her. They say that they cannot just watch her work alone and offer their help to the warriors who protected their family. The girl is very grateful to these people who ask her to participate in healing the wounds. Finally, morning comes and the rays of the just-risen sun begin to fall on the mansion. At this time, Diana sits down on the ground in a dress that is already quite worn out and dirty. She breathes a sigh of relief that it's all over and the medicine cabinet is completely empty. After this, Elliot comes up to her and is going to tell the girl something important. The knight asks her forgiveness for his carelessness, because of which Diana had to lose her long hair. However, she is glad that she is still alive, because unlike life, hair can be grown. After these words, Elliot kneels down and asks Diana to extend her hand to him. The girl is a little surprised, but still does what the head of the knightly order asked her to do. At this moment, he takes her hand in his and tenderly kisses it with his lips, expressing great gratitude to the girl. Diana is very surprised by such a gesture and cannot even find the words to respond. After this, Elliot adds that he will never forget her kindness, and his sympathy level increases to 4%. Diana is very touched by these words and the fact that she was still able to restore the knight's trust. At this point, he asks the girl to stand up and gently holds her hand, helping her to get up. After some time, Elliot returns to his knightly duties in the kingdom and trains soldiers. After honing their combat skills, he gives the warriors an hour break, after which their self-training will begin. Suddenly, he hears a female voice behind him calling the name of the head of the knightly order. In front of him appears Lady Diana, who is very happy to see Elliot again. A girl stands near the gate and waves to greet her family's savior. The knight is very surprised by Diana's appearance on the training ground and decides to approach her. After that, he asks why the girl is here and she apologizes to him for such a sudden visit. But this meeting is very important for her, as she intends to apologize to the soldier whom she once failed to help. At this moment, Elliot remembers the girl's words that she intended to personally ask his comrade for forgiveness. The knight is very surprised that Diana said all these words seriously, but she reminds him that he himself offered to personally apologize to the soldier. After that, she thinks, and there is an awkward pause between them, as Diana has just raised her tone at Elliot. The girl decides to apologize to the head of the knightly order and explains that she simply did not have lunch before visiting him. Elliot tells her that there are plenty of food stalls nearby and he will buy something for her to eat. After some time, the knight returns to Diana and brings her 2 paper bags with lunch. They sit down at a table located on the street and the girl thanks Elliot for his efforts. After this, she immediately starts eating and admires the extraordinary taste of the purchased dishes. She takes out a Scotch egg, which is impaled on a stick and fried in breadcrumbs. Elliot reports that this is the most popular dish at the local stand and is also quite filling. The knight also begins his meal with pleasure and takes a bite of the tasty treat. But if you think about it, the girl herself prescribed Elliot his favorite dish when she was developing the game. After this, he reports that Phil is not at headquarters now, but should come very soon, and then Diana will be able to apologize to him. At this time, he decides to inquire whether anything strange has happened in the Hartfield house since the attack. The girl says that they are completely safe now, but the knight does not think that this is the end. These words frighten the girl a little, and she asks Elliot to tell her more about his assumptions. It turns out that the knight personally interrogated the leader and the maid, but they turned out to be ordinary mercenaries. It turns out that the real criminal is still at large, and the bandits didn't even know his identity. He always wore a hood and hardly spoke, so even the gender of this man is unknown to anyone. After this, Elliot says that he will continue the investigation and the Hartfield family should not relax. However, he asks Diana not to worry as he does not intend to repeat his mistakes next time. After all, in some ways those bandits were right, and a knight cannot simply give orders like a commander-in-chief. Elliot always rushes forward, holding his sword at the ready, and cannot bear to watch his comrades fight alone. It was because of this that so many people suffered on that fateful day. His desire to help his comrades even suggests that he does not trust them. But Diana rushes to reassure Elliot and says that she is the same and always tries to cope with everything on her own. In this, they are similar, and the head of the knightly order replies that the girl seems to be right. After this, he decides to joke and asks Diana to tell him about her problems so that he doesn't feel like a fool. Suddenly, someone shouts at the commander and he immediately turns towards the sound of the voice. At that moment, he sees Phil nearby, who is rushing towards Elliot. The knight stops near the commander-in-chief, who introduces him to Diana, who wanted to see him personally. The girl asks the soldier if he remembers her, and he replies that she is the daughter of the Duke of Hartfield. However, Diana is surprised that Phil remembers her after everything she has done. A year ago, this man saved her life, and she didn't even bother to thank him for such a heroic act. After this, the lady bows to the knight and offers her deepest apologies for her behavior. Phil asks the girl to raise her head and tells her that there is nothing to thank him for. After all, he is a knight, and his duty is to protect all the inhabitants of this kingdom. Phil also adds that Diana recently provided assistance to the injured knights. Among them was his close friend, for whom he is immensely grateful to the girl since she saved his life. After this, Diana turns to Elliot and tells him that Phil is a pretty sweet guy, and she is glad he is okay. At this moment, the head of the knightly order smiles a little, and the girl notices that his sympathy rate has increased to 10%. Having finished her business, Diana says goodbye to the knights and heads back to her duchy. Before that, she goes back to the local shop and buys a Scotch egg. After this, the girl approaches the city fountain and realizes that she will not meet Niall today, since it is not Wednesday yet. Since Elliot said that the main culprit has not been found, then it may turn out to be Neil. After all, this man has had something to take revenge on the Duchy of Hartfield for since his early childhood. Then his entire house and family were burned down, and the boy was left completely alone. At this moment, Diana peers into the water of the fountain and tries to get an answer to her question. She sees her reflection and realizes that sooner or later she will still have to meet Neil. After that, she sits down on a bench and finishes her delicious treat in the middle of a busy street. Suddenly, Diana decides to look down and notices something strange. Her shoes become quite dirty, and she realizes that they need to be polished from time to time. But now she doesn't really care, because the taste of a Scotch egg makes her forget about all her problems. After some time, Diana returns to the duchy, where at the moment complete peace reigns. However, the mistress now has a new personal servant named Dorothy, and today their first meeting will take place. This girl approaches Diana's door and tries to gather her courage before knocking. However, she is terribly scared, because Dorothy has heard a lot of bad things about her mistress, although she has changed recently. The maid begins to burst into tears, because she does not understand why she was appointed as Diana's servant. But for the sake of her mother, she is ready to try and overcome her fears. While Dorothy was preparing to knock on the door, Diana, looking sleepy, opened the door. The lady reports that she heard some noise outside the door and decided to check what was going on there. She notices the frightened face of the maid, and she explains that she is fine. Dorothy gives her name and says that from today on she will be her personal servant. The girl apologizes for such an early visit, but the lady has to go to breakfast, and she asks permission to help her get ready. At this moment, Diana sits down at her dressing table and begins to comb her hair. However, her maid is horrified by her actions, as the mistress should not get ready on her own. After a while, Diana is ready to go out and puts on her dark, fluffy dress. As she walks through the corridors of her mansion, all the maids watch her closely. They wish Diana good morning and bow, although this has never happened before. Dorothy is surprised by the friendly behavior of her mistress, who continues to head to breakfast. Diana leaves the mansion and goes into a beautiful garden, inside of which there is a gazebo. However, she is very unhappy that recently all the maids have become overly polite to her. The girl sits down at the table with Ryan, and he explains that everyone has started to treat her with respect. But Diana says that she cannot react normally to their kindness, and at the same time not suspect anything. Ryan realizes that his sister's previous personal maid was a traitor, but the other servants have come to respect her after her actions. There is logic in their behavior, especially since, apart from the change in the attitude of the servants, nothing around has changed. Diana thinks and realizes that her father and mother did not react to her actions in any way. However, Glenn began to act even more suspiciously towards his sister. He pins her against the wall in one of the hallways of the house and demands that she confess what she has planned. After this, the young man turns around and says that Diana can remain silent as long as she wants, but he will still expose her. Diana notices that her older half-brother's affection score continues to decline and has already reached -22%. However, the girl cannot remember her character's actions and how to correct her mistakes. At this point, Ryan distracts her from her thoughts and tells her that it's time to move on to the most important thing. The guy picks up a mug of tea and asks Diana what she wanted to talk to him about. The girl asks her brother to cover for her in front of her family again while she is about to leave the mansion. After her words, Ryan decides to ask where his sister is going this time. Diana sheepishly says that she would like to meet a friend, but her brother is surprised that she has friends at all. At this point, the girl puts one hand on the back of her head and explains that she is talking about Neil Campbell. These words leave Ryan in severe shock and even spitting out the tea from his mouth. Diana immediately runs to her brother to help him after he choked. Ryan decides that his sister is going on a date, but the girl denies his assumptions. However, in an aristocratic society, the appearance of a man and a woman can be regarded as a meeting of two lovers. Diana is very surprised by this information and decides to ask what she should do in this case. Ryan explains that such rumors can be avoided by taking a maid with you. These words bring horror to Dorothy's face, and she doesn't understand why she is being dragged into this. But Ryan informs that protecting the honor of the mistress is the duty of the personal maid. The maid has no choice but to go with Diana to the kingdom, again doing this for the sake of her mother. Meanwhile, Glenn calmly walks through the corridors of the royal palace. After this, he approaches the doors of His Majesty's chambers and asks forgiveness for the intrusion. At this moment, he hears permission to enter and begins to slowly open the door. Glenn carefully steps over the threshold of the room and gradually walks inside. In front of him is Vince, who is standing with his back to him on his balcony. The prince asks Glenn to call him by his name and says that he has told him this many times already. Meanwhile, the young man continues to stand silently in the middle of the room and does not answer. The prince turns to face him and shows all his charm. After this, Glenn says that in that case he should call him Mr. Vincent Maxwell. However, Vince is not happy with this name and shows it with the expression on his face. At this point, Glenn explains that his comrade is the future ruler of this country, but still demands to be called by his nickname. But Vince doesn't see anything wrong with this and is serious about this kind of treatment. After this, the prince inquires about Glenn's injury, and he says that he will definitely live. Vince goes on to add that during the recent attack on Hartfield Manor, Lady Diana saved many soldiers. Glenn sits down next to the prince and reports that this is indeed the case, but they both find it hard to believe that this girl is capable of such an act. After this, Glenn informs the prince that he only met his sister once. Vince begins to remember the very incident when he was driving his carriage and heard a child crying. He decides to go out and check where this strange sound is coming from. At this moment, he opens the door and goes inside the house, finding a strange picture. Lady Diana stands in the midst of crying children who beg for forgiveness and say they are hungry. The man does not understand what is happening and only hears Diana speaking rudely to them. Suddenly, Glenn appears in front of him and explains that there are too many children arriving at their mansion today because of a charity event. In connection with this, Lady Diana decided to punish the children who came from the orphanage. They were just being naughty, and she suddenly got angry and promised to deprive them of their lunch. At this point, Glenn demands that his sister act in a manner befitting her position and stop bullying the children. But Diana says that she behaves exactly like her older half-brother. He looks down on everyone while pretending to be kind and good. While the adults are sorting out their relationship, Vince decides to pat one of the children on the head and calm him down. He demands that they both stop fighting, as it is frightening these poor children. He then turns to Lady Diana and tells her that her family's financial support for the orphanage does not give her the right to behave like this. However, the girl replies that it is only thanks to the Hartfields that these children have food and clothes, so they must behave well. But Vince is sure that Diana was just lucky to be in this family, so she has no right to say that. These words really anger the girl, and a strong rage appears in her eyes. After this, she starts screaming that no one has any right to talk about her like that. At this point, the young man decides to introduce himself and calls himself Vincent Maxwell. Diana realizes that this is a member of the royal family, and this news shows shock on her face. Her expression immediately changes and she apologizes for her rudeness, inviting Vince to settle in the house. However, such feigned politeness will no longer help the girl, since she has shown her whole self. After this, Vince returns to reality, and Glenn tells him that he will never believe that Diana has changed. But he is very angry that everyone has so quickly forgotten her many bad deeds. Vince tells him to rest in peace and explains that gentlemen should stay out of danger. These words bring Glenn to his senses a little, and he replies that his comrade has started speaking in strange words again. After this, he grabs his head and says that he wants to ask the prince something. He is interested in the man who decided to advise the king to send an order of knights to protect their family. Glenn assumes that it is Vince and decides to ask his friend directly about it. But the prince pauses and does not answer the member of the Hartfield family. After a few seconds, a slight smirk appears on his face as Glenn figures it out. After this, Vince reports that he is surprised by his friend's ability to quickly understand what is what. At this moment, the prince stretches out his hand and turns it palm up. He explains that the most powerful political geniuses from the Hartfield family are located on this thicket of scales. And on the other side of the scale are the excellent swordsmen of the Lane house. After this, he joins his hands together and says that if both of these families bury their hatchet, they will be able to strengthen the entire kingdom. However, Glenn lets out a resigned sigh and tells Vince that he's back to his old ways. But his plan, with the help of the Lane family, worked perfectly, and the Hartfield family remained alive. Thanks to this, Vince is closer to his goal and is going to put it on the map. Today, his mission on the agenda is to figure out how to unite the entire aristocracy. After all, in this way, he will be able to provide the kingdom with a wonderful, bright future. Meanwhile, in the city square near the fountain, everyone gathered to see the performance. At this moment, Neil stands in front of the people, holding daggers and colorful balls in his hands. He begins to juggle dangerous sharp objects and handles them deftly. After this, the man throws one of the daggers into the air and spins it vigorously. Some people in the crowd cover their faces with their hands, as they are very frightened by such a performance. But Neil deftly catches the falling dagger, which does not cause him any harm. After this, he bows low to his audience and announces that the performance is over for today. At this point, the audience begins to put coins in his suitcase and eagerly awaits his next appearance in a week. But Neil, meanwhile, is busy thinking about the fact that Diana did not come that day either. He has already decided not to come to the fountain anymore when he sees a familiar hand next to him, which holds out a flower to him. The girl says that she would be sad to lose a friend like him. Neil looks up from where he sits in front of his suitcase and is very surprised. After all, he sees Diana in front of him, asking for forgiveness for being late with the meeting. She praises him for a great show, and Neil continues to stare at her. Suddenly, he notices that she has cut her hair, and Diana explains that she simply changed her hairstyle. Neil was very annoyed by this, as the girl's long locks were very beautiful. After this, he asks about her strange cape, and Diana reports that she had to escape from the mansion unnoticed. At this moment, she extends her hand to him and asks her friend to rise from his knees. The girl invites Neil to take a walk around the capital, and they leave the fountain square. Before she left, she managed to talk to Ryan about Neil Campbell. He told her that before he was taken into the family, he was the son of the Marquis of Baker, who died with all his family in a fire. Diana heard about this and is aware that Neil was the only survivor of this tragedy. However, things are not so simple because the Hartfield family had a hand in this misfortune. At this moment, the girl lowers her gaze down as she regrets it. After all, the head of the Baker family was a political rival of her stepfather. and the Duke could think of nothing better than to destroy his entire house and his entire family. As a result, the poor child was left without a home and without his beloved parents one day. All the relatives learned the truth and were afraid to adopt Neil, not even trying to restore the former greatness of the family. In connection with this, distant relatives from the Campbell family decided to take in the boy. But on the day his family died, Neil vowed to destroy every single Hartfield. This is exactly how Diana made it when she was coming up with the story of the characters in this game. Ryan notices his sister's extreme dejection and decides to ask if she is okay. She replies that she was just thinking, and her brother explains that he is aware of her friendship with Neil, who could use this for his own purposes. And this is indeed true, since the young man took advantage of Diana's loneliness to get closer to the enemy. The reason for his low sympathy is that from the very beginning he saw the girl only as a scion of the Hartfield family, whom he swore to exterminate. It is for this reason that Diana decides to meet with Neil, who hates her so much. At this point, Ryan starts to smile and says that it looks a lot like his sister. After a short walk, Diana and Neil start playing chess, and the young man decides to ask how her younger brother covered her up from the family. He says he is glad to hear that Diana has improved her relationship with at least one member of her family. At this moment, she remembers the previous choice of the game when they met and understands why it was exactly like that. The whole point is that Neil wanted to find out about the situation in the house and what kind of relationship she had with family members. Diana takes a sip of coffee and understands that with a man who has sworn to destroy your family, you always need to be on your guard. After this, Neil says that he didn't think that the girl liked coffee without anything, but she smiles and explains that she managed to fall in love with him during their meetings. At this point, Neil gets up from the table and invites his companion to continue their walk. Diana agrees, but before doing so, she makes her move in chess and checkmates her opponent. Neil is very discouraged by his loss and does not understand how it happened. But the girl decides not to focus on this and invites the young man to take her for a walk. Although some excitement can be seen on his face after losing, he still agrees to move on. The first thing the couple does is go to one of the local shops to buy some jewelry. After this, Neil decides to show his show again and performs in front of the audience, juggling balls. At this moment, Diana lowers her hand to her bag and closes its pocket. She thanks her companion for a wonderful day and is glad that she bought herself a lot of jewelry. However, Neil asks her not to rush, as this is not the end of it. He asks the girl to go with him to show her an interesting place. Diana turns and follows Neil as he leads her to a deserted area. They find themselves in the middle of a street where it is already gradually starting to get dark. After this, Neil takes Diana to one of the large houses, which is closed by a gate. The girl begins to feel very scared, but the young man grabs her by the waist and leads her forward. He asks Diana not to run away, as he promised someone that he would bring the girl to this place. Neil opens the door and invites the girl to the most unusual place in the royal capital. After all, he has one ticket to enter the black market especially for Diana. The girl goes inside the mansion, where everyone present wears masquerade masks on their faces. A box opens for them containing rare precious stones. People are ready to pay many gold coins for these valuables in order to become their owners. Neil also enters the mansion with Diana and finds himself in the middle of the ballroom. But he does not intend to take part in the dance, but goes down into the dark room. At this moment, Neil holds a candle in his hands to light the dark steps. A month earlier, the events unfold in the house of a man who shakes tobacco from his pipe into an ashtray. He sits in his soft chair and greets a man named Greiman. This man turns out to be Neil, and he decides to ask what he did to deserve a meeting with the manager himself. John announces that he has a special order for which he is willing to pay generously. Neil then tries to brush away the pungent tobacco smoke and asks what he should do. The manager makes his look as serious as possible and announces that he must bring Diana Hartfield to his house. But Neil didn't expect a task that would be related to this girl and is a little surprised. It turns out that someone was so annoyed by this girl that the client wanted to see her head. Neil starts laughing and says that he can't betray a friend he's known since childhood. But Joan explains that this man has something more important than his girlfriend and says the name Neil Baker. Since the young man hid his true identity and called himself Grayman, these words leave him stunned. After this, he tries to find out from the manager where he got all the information about him. But Joan starts laughing and says that the mask of the merry fellow has finally cracked. The manager has seen many like Neil and knows all about his friendship with Diana and the young man's past. All his actions only indicate that he keeps the girl close to him for the sake of revenge. After this, Neil decides to find out what he will get if he brings Diana to this house. Joan promises him that she can provide solid evidence that the Marquis of Baker's family was killed by the Hartfield family. After some time, Neil finally brings Diana to the mansion and visits her in the dungeon, praising her outfit. The girl at this moment is sitting behind bars with her hands tied and wearing a very vulgar dress. She demands that Neil let her out, but he demands that the girl shut up since no one will come to her aid anyway. After that, she grabs the bars with her hands and tries to figure out why her friend brought her here. Neil explains that one client wants to buy her, or more precisely, her head. After such words, Diana is speechless and doesn't even know what to answer her opponent. However, Neil just laughs and explains that the girl was simply unlucky enough to run into some weirdo. But he decided that killing her right away would be too wasteful, so the young man decided to give the client her head and sell her organs. Horror appears on Diana's face, and she does not understand why Neil decided to do this to her. After these words, the young man says that he can be justified by the death of his family because of the Hartfields. Because of them, he lost his father and mother, as well as his beloved younger sister. These memories will never leave his head and will always appear in the form of a little boy who saw the death of his family. That day, they were unable to escape from the burning house, and the father demanded that his son take the opportunity and leave the mansion. However, he did not want to leave his family, and tears appeared on his face. But the father does not stop demanding that Neil run away because he wants to save him. As a result, the young man finally decides to leave his parents and call for help. Unfortunately, it all ends with the family not being saved and Neil finding himself next to 3 coffins. The parents covered their sister with their bodies, which is why Viola looked like she was sleeping soundly. After this, Neil cuts off a lock of her hair as a souvenir and promises to take revenge on those responsible for her death. He puts this hair on his palm and continues to look at it with sadness and longing in his eyes. To keep this memory with him forever, Neil decides to put this lock of hair into his pendant. All this time, he continues to live only in order to one day destroy every member of the Hartfield family. At this moment, Joan appears in the dungeon and decides to ask Neil what he is chatting about with Diana. After this, he adds that the client is already waiting for the girl's head and it's time to act. Diana understands that now the bars will be opened and she needs to use this chance. At the same second, she jumps out and runs past Neil, who doesn't have time to do anything. The girl understands that she needs to run as fast as she can, despite the fact that her hands are tied. At this moment, Neil takes a gun out of his jacket and is about to stop the escaped girl. He points his gun straight at her back and is about to make the fatal shot. The bullet passes through and red drops of blood fly out of Diana's chest. However, John is unhappy with his partner's actions, as they have no right to kill the goods. But Neil says that this psycho wanted her dead body anyway, so that's what he's going to get. Luckily, Diana has her glass slippers back on, which reboots her once again. Suddenly, she opens her eyes and realizes that she has woken up as if from a bad dream. Diana jumps out of her bed and tries to catch her breath after yet another death. She doesn't understand why things turned out this way and why she wasn't given a choice this time. The girl also tries to understand whether this is somehow connected with Neil's very low percentage of sympathy. After all, this love interest personally killed her without even a moment's hesitation in his actions. After all these terrible memories, the girl slaps herself on the cheeks to come to her senses. The girl decides to calm down and analyze the situation with the black market, which she cannot avoid. She understands that this is the place where she needs to look for a way out and solve this mystery. Diana goes back to the Fountain Square and meets Neil there again. However, now she will do everything to ensure that this time her love interest cannot kill her. Diana is determined to change the situation in her favor and leave Neil no chance. Meanwhile, the young man again looks at the girl with a surprised look, as he did not expect her sudden appearance. However, she ends up behind bars again, as she did not receive a single clue during the entire walk. At that moment, the thought comes to her mind that these clues must be in this place. After this, Neil appears again near the bars and repeats his phrase about how this vulgar outfit suits the girl. She again demands to be released, but the kidnapper demands that she sit quietly and wait for her turn. At this point, she grabs the bars with her hands and tries to persuade Neil to listen to her. But the kidnapper has no intention of showing compassion for her and merely places the sole of his shoe on the metal bars of the prison. After this, Neil starts laughing and demands that Diana shut up immediately. Then he asks the question, did the girl really not understand everything the first time? But suddenly Diana is faced with her first choice, which asks her to continue to resist. She understands that if she does nothing, she will simply die, so she decides not to remain silent in this situation. After this, Neil opens the bars and says that this is a pathetic situation for the girl. Diana runs outside again, but sees no more clues from the game. At this moment, Neil grabs her hand and prevents the girl from escaping from the dungeon. He covers her mouth with a handkerchief and tells her that she won't succeed. Then Diana realizes that everything before her eyes begins to swim, and she loses consciousness. After this, her limp body falls into the arms of her captor, who is pleased with the silence that has formed around him. Suddenly, Joan appears in front of him and asks what he did with the girl. Neil explains that he simply cooled her ardor and that Diana is actually fine. The manager informs them that it is time for them to move, as the client has decided to sell her as an ordinary city girl. But Neil is unhappy with such a low price, since this girl is the daughter of an influential duke. However, Joan explains that this is just a cover so that the right client will look at it himself and others will not have time to buy it. Sometime later, Diana finds herself at an auction, sitting on a chair as an ordinary commodity. She is described as a commoner who has not yet regained consciousness. After this, a lively trade begins, with everyone offering their price. People are not against acquiring a girl for themselves, who will be used for their personal purposes. After lengthy bidding, the auctioneer bangs the gavel on the table and announces the buyer. At this moment, Diana opens her eyes and finally comes to consciousness, not understanding where she is. The girl only has time to hear that she was sold to number 46 for 650 coins. After some time, Joan and Neil hand it over to the buyer and ask him to be careful with the lot. This person turns out to be a certain girl who hides her face under a mask. At this point, Neil whispers in Diana's ear that she was unlucky enough to fall into the clutches of this client. The girl begins to follow her buyer and realizes that this time events are going in a different direction. She is wildly afraid of the unknown and what might happen to her next. Meanwhile, she gets into a carriage which takes Diana away to an unknown destination. At this point, the buyer takes off her mask and says that she is surprised that such a young lady is selling. After all, she was put up for sale as an ordinary slave and now she must be very scared. Diana is surprised that this girl behaves absolutely normally and tells her that everything will end soon. After some time, they finally arrive at their destination, where there is a large mansion. After this, Diana's buyer prepares a bath for her and suggests that she take a bath first. The girl is very surprised by this proposal and looks closely into the dark room. At this point, she notices something strange in that the bathtub is empty and not filled with water. Suddenly, the maid grabs Diana by the neck and pushes her forward, dropping her to her knees. The girl begins to feel strong fear and tries to understand what these people are up to. After this, Diana's new owner shows her reflection in the mirror and takes out a dagger. It turns out that this woman is going to plunge her blade into her to rejuvenate herself. This will be possible after Diana's blood fills the bathtub and the buyer can bathe in it. This woman is obsessed with her youth and can't wait to make her dreams come true. After this, she swings her dagger over Diana's head and asks her to be patient for a little while. Horror appears in the girl's eyes and she begins to beg him not to do this to her. But her pleas for mercy go unheard and Diana wakes up again at midnight in her room. She sits up in bed again and begins to think about all the horrors that have happened to her. The girl clutches her blanket in her fist and doesn't understand what she did to deserve all this. After all, Diana is not the biological daughter of the Hartfield family, so she is in no way involved in the murder of Neil's family. She also doesn't understand what's wrong with this game, and the next day she goes back to the square by the fountain. Neil closes his coin case and invites the girl to walk to the coffee shop. Diana silently rises from her seat and agrees to follow her companion. At this point, Neil tells the girl that something is wrong with her and that she has changed a little. She turns to the young man and explains that it is because of the new haircut that has made her hair shorter. After this, she continues walking towards the coffee shop in her glass slippers. Now she doesn't care about Neil's sympathy level, as she intends to take revenge on everyone in this black market. After some time, Neil and Diana find themselves inside the coffee shop and sit down opposite each other. While they play chess, the girl thinks about her moves in real life. She understands that the auction cannot be avoided and she should do everything to avoid being sold. Meanwhile, Neil smiles sweetly and wonders if Diana will be able to beat him at chess this time. Suddenly it occurs to her that this route is similar in its strategy to chess. She begins to think and understands that without risk, she cannot survive in this situation. This means that she will have to try everything to avoid losing her life in this game. After some time, she finds herself behind bars again, and Neil places his foot on the iron bars. He makes the girl shut up, and Diana has a choice to continue resisting. This time she decides to calm down, and Neil is very surprised by her choice. After all, not every person can so easily accept his fate, and after that he decides to leave. But Diana made this decision only in order to be conscious at the auction. She is brought back into the center of the room and announced as a lottery as a beautiful commoner. The initial bid is 100 gold coins, after which active bidding begins. But now, a board with a choice appears in front of Diana, where she is asked to reveal the truth about her origin. The girl thought that because of her unconscious state, this choice did not appear last time. Now it's time to change the game, and Diana decides to tell everyone present the truth about herself. She informs the buyers that she is the only daughter of the Duke of Hartfield. This announcement comes as a shock to Neil, as no one was supposed to know about her true origins. After this, Diana begins to smile and adds that it is worth much more than 100 gold coins. And if she is ransomed, she promises to tell all the secrets of the Duchy of Hartfield. After all, she is not an ordinary commoner and is ready to offer much more in exchange for freedom. At this moment, a lively bidding begins in the hall for the girl, who is such a valuable lot. Everyone starts raising their stakes because no one wants to miss their chance. Joan realizes that the situation is getting out of control, and the real customer is at risk of being left without goods. After this, Neil realizes that Diana doesn't have any secrets, and he is not the only one who holds a grudge against the Hartfield family. But Diana doesn't give a damn about these buyers, about Neil, or about this incomprehensible game she finds herself in. Meanwhile, Neil realizes that he miscalculated, and the girl is not as simple as she seems. At this moment, she looks him straight in the eyes and thinks that she will get out of there at any cost. The bidding continues to gain momentum, and buyers raise their hands one after another. Each of them does not want to miss the chance to find out what secrets are hidden in the Hartfield family. Diana's plan worked, because she was counting on everyone starting to bite each other's throats for her. At this moment, Neil steps into the center of the room and shouts Diana's name. The girl turns to face him and tells him that she will not simply meekly await her fate. Moreover, she will never forgive her friend for the way he treated her. Suddenly, John appears behind her, holding a sharp dagger in his hand. He intends to destroy the girl and put her up for auction as a corpse. But Diana suddenly finds herself behind Neil, who takes the blow of the dagger on himself. A sharp blade hits him right in the stomach and causes a serious wound. At this moment, the girl experiences great fear for Neil and shouts out his name. Meanwhile, the young man falls to his knees and prepares to accept his fate. Diana stands behind him and watches her friend's terrible suffering. On the one hand, the game won't end if one of the love interests dies. But at that moment, Neil notices that the girl's eyes are filling with tears. He doesn't understand why she's crying, because this situation should make her happy. Neil is well aware that Diana hates him for everything he put her through. The girl agrees with him and considers it reasonable that she should hate him, but she cannot come to terms with his death. But the thing is that memories of Diana from her past friendship with Neil are popping up in her head. She really considered him her only friend, with whom she spent all her time. Now these memories are raging in her head and she simply cannot resist them. Diana continues to cry and blame Neil for the fact that all this happened only because of him. After this, he tells her that she is right and touches her face with his hand. But when he was near her, he only forgot for a moment that she was part of the Hartfield family. However, he couldn't take advantage of the chance with her death, and his body moved on its own to protect her. After these words, Neil finally loses consciousness and no longer reacts to anything. Diana begins to cry heavily, sitting in front of her friend's body, and begs him not to die. But at that moment, Joan takes out a gun and accuses the girl of failing the bidding. Now she must pay for it with her life, and a bullet pierces her body at that very moment. After this, the lifeless bodies of two friends appear in the center of the hall under the spotlights. Time begins to rewind again, and Diana receives a notification that her shoes have 6 lives left. At this moment, she wakes up again on her bed and clutches her head with her hand. This warning from the system frightens her greatly, since the number of lives is catastrophically low. After this, the girl rises from the bed and reaches to the floor for her shoes. She notices that half of them have become very blackened, as if they had been stained with something. Diana had noticed this last time in the square, but hadn't attached any importance to it then. However, this is not dirt at all, but an indicator that the magic in the shoes is running out. This is very bad, because she still has 2 more love interests to bring to the plus. After this, the girl decides to pull herself together and focus on how to solve Neil's route. At this moment, she remembers Neil's words that it is all her fault and begins to burst into bitter tears. After all, it was she who created him as such a character with a difficult fate after the loss of his parents. And it was she who sent Neil to the Campbells, where he was treated very badly, after which he hated his only friend so much that he set himself the goal of killing her. But it is not Diana who deserves his righteous anger, but the game's creator, Mana Minagawa. However, the girl can no longer change anything and rewrite the background. And if so, then Diana will do everything to pull Neil out of this abyss of hopeless hatred. After this, the girl thinks about the words the young man spoke before his death. He reported that he had only momentarily forgotten that she was part of the Hartfield family, and that the level of her hatred had decreased by half after that. After this, Diana begins to remember all the things that Neil did to her. They also include the moment when the young man shot his girlfriend in the back, and that situation when he listened to her requests for help with a cold gaze. And even the way Neil calmly gave her to the buyer who did terrible things to her. But all this leads Diana to think that her friend could also be suffering at these moments. After some time, the girl again finds herself behind bars in the hands of her kidnappers. But this time, Diana understands that only she can understand this character. Neil is filled with revenge for his family and has vowed to kill all the Hartfields, but only when he is around Diana does he experience dissonance in his soul. By playing on his confusion, the girl can lure Neil to her side. After some time, she again finds herself at an auction in the middle of a huge hall. At this moment, she looks ahead and focuses her gaze on Niall. After this, a board appears in front of her with an offer to reveal to the guests the truth about her origin. But this time, Diana refuses this choice and loudly shouts Neil's name. The girl then states that his desire for revenge pales in comparison to the fact that he considers her a friend. And if he wanted her dead so much, he wouldn't have given her this walk. He also would not have wasted time going shopping, but would have brought Diana to this place straight away. All this indicates that doubts are creeping into Neil's heart. After all, revenge only breeds revenge, and there will never be a way out of this circle. Diana knows what she's talking about because she recently experienced all of this herself during Neil's death. So she decides to suggest to her friend to change everything while there is still time for it. At this moment, Joan comes up to her and tries to shut her mouth so that she doesn't talk nonsense. But Diana manages to say that she doesn't consider Neil a villain and knows him as a guy who gives smiles. These words leave the young man in a state of great shock, and even greater doubts arise in his heart. She then adds that she believes that Neil is only pretending to be a villain. At this point, his sympathy score increases by 10%. But John orders the auctioneer to waste no time and begin bidding immediately. The man immediately bangs the hammer on the table and announces an opening bet of 100 gold coins. At this moment, Diana thinks that if Neil really suffered all this time, then he will start acting right now. But the young man continues to stand motionless and watch as Diana is put up for auction. At this point, he remembers a conversation with his father about his constant work. But he explains that he does this for the good of their family and those who rely on their home. After this, the father instructs his son to work hard in the future and bring joy to those who are dear to him. These words made the little boy think and accept his dad's request. After all, he was always an example of a bright and pure attitude towards all people. But after the death of his parents, Neil could not remember their faces, seeing only their blurry outline. At this point, he takes a step forward and his sympathy score increases by another 2%. After this, it reaches -12% and Neil accelerates strongly towards Diana. After all, even if he lives for revenge, the young man will never disobey the words of his father. He then approaches Diana and informs the guests that their auction is now over. Neil unties his girlfriend's hands and adds that this item is being withdrawn from the auction. After this, he begins to lead her along and takes her away from the ill-fated black market. At that moment, a little boy pops into his head and tries to make him come to his senses. After all, he is one step away from taking his revenge and obtaining the necessary evidence. But Neil says that Diana is his friend, and so he decided to save her. However, the child reports that the girl was never his friend, and he always saw her as a tool to get close to the Hartfield family. This child turns out to be little Neil, who promised himself to avenge the death of his parents. But the grown-up youth tells his inner child that he knows this very well. However, even the inner one is not able to fully understand his true feelings. At this point, the child continues to look at Neil with a serious gaze and does not answer. But Neil adds that he does not intend to back down from his father's words and leaves the little avenger. The child is left alone, and the thought that the grown-up youth turns out to be a fool haunts him. Meanwhile, Neil continues to lead Diana away from the auction and leads her towards the exit. But at that moment, John appears before them and reminds the young man of their deal. Neil tells him that he has never met a buyer and has no guarantee that he has what he needs. All this leads him to refuse to continue this deal and break all agreements. At this point, Joan replies that it's a great pity and puts her hand in the inside pocket of her jacket. Diana's face shows wild horror at what she sees before her. Joan takes out her gun and points the barrel towards the girl. After this, Diana turns to Neil and tells him that they need to take urgent action. But before the girl can finish speaking, the manager fires a fatal shot. At this moment, Neil tries to cover Diana with his body and falls to the floor with her. John realizes he missed and tells the fugitives that they are lucky this time, but Neil also takes out a gun and explains that there will be no next time. After this, he fires a shot and knocks the gun out of his opponent's hands. Then he grabs Diana's hand and decides to take her away from this dangerous place. But on their way, they are confronted by several people who point their pistols at them. However, Neil is not at all at a loss in this situation, and a smile appears on his face. At this point, he takes out his daggers and announces that the show is about to begin. Sharp blades fly out of his hands in the same second and head forward. After this, they all fall into the flames of the candles and leave the room in darkness. All the guests immediately get lost in this environment and lose sight of each other. Neil and Diana then head for the exit, and Joan gives the order to stop them immediately. At this moment, his subordinates rush forward to carry out the manager's order. Finally, they see a man who looks like Neil and are happy that they caught up with him. But apart from the man, they don't find anyone else, although there should be a girl next to him. After this, they decide to take a closer look and realize that it is not Grayman at all. Suddenly, Neil attacks them from behind and deals a crushing blow to one of their opponents. Then the other man takes out his gun and points it towards the boy. However, he doesn't have time to fire, as Neil knocks the gun and his hands out of his hands. All this time, Diana carefully watches her friend and understands that he is good enough. Having finished with the opponents, Neil turns to the girl and reports that her plan worked. But he decides to joke and says that with ash in her hair, she looks like an ash princess. After this, Diana remembers the moment when they were hiding from their pursuers. Finding herself in a room with a fireplace, she sees a sign with an offer to use the ashes to disguise herself as Neil. At this point, she was just lucky enough to find another clue, after which she returns her friend's jacket. But Neil doesn't react to the girl in any way and silently looks at her hair. After this, he begins to shake the ashes off them to return Diana to her former appearance. After some time, the young man finally cleans the girl's curls. Then he touches her face with his hands and tries to understand who she really is. Diana focuses her gaze on Neil and decides to ask him what he means. At this point, the young man explains that the real Diana would never have thought of such a thing. Her mistake was that Neil knew the girl better than anyone else. An ordinary person would never notice the difference because the appearance remained the same. Neil was really the only one who noticed a big change in Diana's behavior. But even he contains within himself the roles of several personalities, and therefore cannot make such a claim. And Diana is a character that Mana created in her own image, and she will always remain herself. After these words, the girl touches Neil's mask with her hands and is about to take it off. At this point, she tells him that he understands perfectly well what the girl means. Suddenly, Neil's likability score increases and reaches -8%. He then says that he has a strong feeling that she is fooling him, but this time he will turn a blind eye to it. After this, Neil picks up the jacket and begins to put it on his body. But Diana is still tormented by the question of who really wanted to take possession of her head. All that is known is that this man was willing to pay a lot of money, and the girl understands that this could be the same man that Elliot described. In that case, Neil is not involved in these events, but suddenly they both hear the sound of a door opening. At that moment, a man in a robe and with a hood on his head appears in front of them. He wears a mask on his face and walks towards Neil and Diana, holding a lamp in his hands. After this, he releases it from his fingers and deliberately drops it on the floor. Flames begin to flare up around her, and Neil covers Diana with his body, grabbing the daggers. The mysterious man then turns around and walks back, deciding to set the place on fire. Diana shields herself from the flames with her hand and wonders if the villain did it just to kill her. After this, she turns to Neil and asks him to leave the fire immediately. However, the young man falls into a stupor and all the daggers fall out of his hands. Despite Diana's best efforts to call him and bring him to his senses, Neil cannot hear her. All his attention is focused on the flame, which takes him back to past memories. A picture of his parents being in the same fire and unable to do anything appears before his eyes. But Diana doesn't give up and grabs her friend's hand, trying to guide him towards the exit. After this, Neil still succumbs to her manipulation and leaves with the girl. Meanwhile, real panic begins in the building, and the guests run away in different directions. After some time, Neil and Diana find themselves safe, and the girl tries to catch her breath. At this moment, the young man tries to feel the pendant with his younger sister's curls on his neck. However, he does not find it, and realizes that the medallion dear to him has disappeared without a trace. This causes him to panic wildly, since this is the only thing that is kept as a memory of the family. Since Viola's funeral, he kept this pendant and never took it off his neck. In this regard, Neil decides to go back and find him, but Diana stops her friend in time. However, the young man begins to resist, and the girl warns him that he will not get out alive. But Neil doesn't understand what Diana means and asks her about it again. At this point, the girl explains that he started shaking all over at the sight of the fire and won't be able to find the pendant in this state. After this, Neil decides to look at his hands and notices that they are shaking violently. Then he falls to his knees and clutches his head because it was the only thing he had left from his loved ones. Suddenly, a board with a choice appears in front of Diana again, which is very difficult for her to accept in such a situation. In it, she is asked to force Neil to surrender or find the pendant on her own. Both options turn out to be terrible, but Diana decides to return to the burning building. Despite the enormous danger and the possibility that she will not survive, she still decides to take this step. After all, the girl promised herself that she would make Neil happy at any cost. After this, she asks her friend to stay put and goes in search of the pendant that is dear to him. Diana turns towards the burning building and runs inside in a hurry. Neil turns around and looks at his friend with surprise as she runs into the flames for him. At this point, his inner child emerges again and wonders how he can just stand there and watch while someone dies for him. After this, he makes a huge effort to lift his trembling body from the ground. After all, if Diana dies this time because of him, she will never be able to forgive herself. Meanwhile, the entire building is already engulfed in a huge flame of fire. Neil runs into the house and tries to find Diana there, shouting her name. Suddenly, he hears her voice and turns towards the direction from which the sound comes. At this moment, he discovers a girl lying on the floor and approaches her. The young man takes Diana in his arms and she is going to show him something. The girl gives him the pendant and asks him to get out of this place as soon as possible. After this, she loses consciousness and Neil tries to bring her back to her senses. He then decides not to waste any time and clutches the pendant tightly in his hand. He then grabs Diana and heads for the exit, telling her that it is too early for her to die. Neil carries her down a smoky corridor surrounded by a large flame of fire. Suddenly, he realizes that he is starting to lose consciousness from the smoke and that the exit is still far away. He puts Diana down on the floor and realizes that this time he won't be able to save anyone. But out of nowhere, the ghost of his younger sister appears and asks her brother not to give up. Neil looks up and looks at Viola, who has been dead for a long time, with a shocked expression. After this, he gathers his strength and takes Diana into his arms again, heading towards the exit. Although he understands that these are just hallucinations caused by the smoke, there is still a reason for her appearance. After all, thanks to his beloved little sister, he will never give up and will save his friend. A short time later, they find themselves outside and Neil tries to bring Diana to her senses. Finally, the girl barely opens her eyes and pronounces the name of her savior. At this moment, he does not let go of Diana and asks about her well-being. Suddenly, the girl notices that his sympathy indicator has reached 0 and gone out of minus. But most importantly, Diana was able to survive and save her remaining reboot attempts. After this, she completely comes to her senses and thanks Neil for saving her. But the guy understands that everything happened because of him, and Diana has nothing to thank him for. Meanwhile, another person appears behind them, who is interested in the reason why the guys are here. It turns out to be the head of the Nightly Order, Elliot, who came to the scene of the fire. Diana immediately goes to meet him and asks the reason for his appearance. It turns out that the Nightly Order became aware of the black market being located in this building. In this regard, Elliot must conduct an investigation here and find out all the details. After this, the knight decides to ask Diana what she is doing in this place. However, he notices that the girl and her companion have just escaped from the fire. At this point, Neil shows Elliot the girl's wrist and draws his attention to the rope marks. He then adds that the girl was kidnapped by traffickers to be resold on the black market. The knight is very shocked by this news and decides to ask Diana if this is true. The girl confirms these words, and Elliot breathes a sigh of relief that she is now safe. After this, he turns his wary gaze to Neil and asks him a question. Elliot is interested in the identity of this young man and the reason why he ended up in this place. Neil tries to collect his thoughts and tell the real reason for his presence here, but Diana stands up for him and says that he is her friend and he came here to save her. The girl asks Mr. Elliot to believe her words and not to suspect Neil of anything. After this, the knight says that he is ready to believe it if this young man brings her home safe and sound. Diana thanks Elliot for his generosity, but Neil decides to find out what will happen to him if he refuses. At this moment, the knight takes out his sharp sword and swings it towards the young man. He puts the weapon to his throat and tells him that, in this case, he will be left alone with his blade. Neil raises his hands up and promises that he will fulfill his request and send Diana home. After this, Elliot lets the boys go, but warns that he will call them in for questioning in a couple of days. Diana says goodbye to her comrade, while Neil breathes a sigh of relief. After some time, they find themselves on one of the capital's streets, which is decorated with the light of lanterns. Neil decides to ask why Diana ran into the burning building, and she explains that she simply wanted to return something dear to him. The young man decides that the girl has no friends at all, and she replies that she used to have one friend. It was the same girl with whom they had developed the app together, but then lost touch. This is precisely the reason why Diana values her friendship with Neil so much. The young man glances sideways at the girl and decides not to answer her. But at this moment, Diana tells him that he himself saved her, although he initially sought her death. After this, she says that it would be right to restore justice. So Diana decides to help Neil and finally make him happy. However, the young man pretends that he doesn't understand at all what his girlfriend is getting at. At this moment, Diana meets her agitated maid, who is in tears. After all, as soon as she learned about the fire, she immediately rushed to the city to find the lady. After this, Neil lets his companion go, as she can now safely get home. But finally, he touches her hair and gently runs his hand through it. Diana is very surprised, and a beautiful decoration appears on her curls. Neil says that he bought this hairpin at the market during his walk, and now she can decorate her short hair with it. However, the girl is somewhat confused, as after his purchase, Neil was going to sell her. After her words, Neil admits that he acted stupidly, and his sympathy level reaches 6%. However, he is glad that everything ended this way, and he was able to give this hairpin to his girlfriend. He then asks to accept this gift as an apology, and Diana agrees. At this point, she adds that she will really treasure the gift from her friend. After this, the girl gets into the carriage and leaves Neil alone in the middle of a deserted street. The young man says goodbye to Diana and says that he will look forward to their next meeting. The girl looks out the window one last time and reciprocates her friend's feelings. Immediately after their farewell, the carriage sets off and takes Diana home. After seeing his friend off, Neil turns around and heads towards his house. He walks slowly down the capital street and puts one hand in his pocket. At this moment, he feels something unusual there and takes out this object. In his palm appears the very flower that Diana gave him during their meeting at the fountain. She then praised Neil for a great show and greeted him warmly. In connection with this, the young man understands that he did save this flower that time. After Viola's death, only her dead face remained in his memory, but other memories still surface. For example, how his little sister gave him exactly the same flower after his tricks. She liked them very much and thanked her brother for showing them to her. Viola held the flower in her little hands and handed it to Neil with all her heart. And now exactly the same plant lies in the palms of the young man and reminds him of a loved one. Finally, he can remember not only her dead face but also her bright smile. After this, he decides to keep this flower and puts it in the inside pocket of his jacket. Neil then puts his hands behind his head and thinks about what trick he will show Diana next. Meanwhile, it is already dark at the Hartfield mansion, and Diana is just returning home. Ryan meets her with all severity, since the girl violated all temporary agreements. Diana asks her brother to forgive her, since she is already home and everything is fine with her. But suddenly Ryan feels even more surprised as he looks closely at his little sister. He notices her indecent appearance, and Diana explains that she ended up on the black market. After this, she tells him the details of the whole story, and Ryan faints. A new day dawns, and it would seem that there is no trace left of the terrible events of the past. Diana, meanwhile, is in the garden and wearing the very same hairpin that Neil gave her. The girl waters the flowers and thinks that she was able to defeat her friend after all. Now all she has to do is increase the favor of her remaining 2 love interests. At this moment, Dorothy appears next to her, praising her mistress for her beautiful singing. Diana thanks her for the compliment and explains that she had been humming the melody without realizing it. The Duke's daughter was previously extremely illiterate until she came into the Hartfield family. But she loved to sing, especially when it came to songs with a guitar. Since then, one melody in another language has been spinning in her head. Suddenly, Ryan appears next to her and asks if Diana regrets her reckless act. After this, he switches to the poor maid who left her mistress unattended. The whole matter was further aggravated by the fact that the knights personally came to the mansion to interrogate Diana. The girl understands that she has caused a lot of trouble and decides to apologize to her brother once again. However, this led Ryan's father to learn that he was involved in creating an alibi for Diana. As a result, they were both placed under house arrest for a whole week as punishment. All this time, Ryan was unable to take care of his garden, and now this place has turned into a real nightmare. Diana sincerely repents for setting up her brother and offers him her help. She doesn't know if she will be able to atone for her guilt, so she gives her brother a bag of seeds. Diana managed to buy them when she went to the capital for interrogation by the head of the knightly order. Ryan takes the bag in his hands and pours some of the seeds onto his hand, wondering about his sister's choice. The girl explains her actions by the fact that after a recent incident, one part of the garden burned down. Although she doesn't know whether she chose the right variety or not, Diana just wants to please her brother. But Ryan doesn't answer and continues to silently examine the seeds given to him. Diana sees his confusion and suggests that they just throw them away, but the younger brother decides to keep the gift. However, this is the first time he will be growing seeds, so there is no guarantee that they will germinate. After that, they sit down next to the flower bed with Diana, and Ryan prepares the seeds. Then he makes 2 small holes in the ground to plant the future flowers. Next, Ryan begins pouring seeds into the dug holes and finishes planting the plants. Meanwhile, complete peace reigns in the royal palace, and only the sun's rays illuminate the walls of the rooms. Glenn decides to visit Vince again and sits down with him at the table to talk. At this point, their conversation is interrupted by a man who addresses the heir to the royal family. This man turns out to be Vince's father, who is interested in his return visit to an important place. Glenn immediately bows to the king, but the prince did not expect to see the king at his place. His Majesty explains that he respects his son's position in relation to the late king and his emulation of him. But before the king can finish speaking, Vince replies that this is not an imitation. After all, if you don't get closer to people, then there can be no talk of their support. However, his father reminds Vince that the previous king was killed by his own people. At that time, the ruler sat on his horse and warmly greeted the inhabitants of the capital. But at one point, some ill-wisher takes out his pistol and makes a fatal shot. However, Vince does not think that the method of oppressing people is good, so he follows in the footsteps of the previous king. However, his father explains that the monarchy must continue to demonstrate to the people the authority of those at the top. But Vince continues to insist on his own, and reports that the repressions will lead to the emergence of an anti-monarchist ideology among the population. The black market where the knights had recently gone was an example of this, and weapons were also sold there. At this point, the king asks Vince if he is sure about this, and the prince states that it is the absolute truth. After this, His Majesty begins to feel displeased that such things were being done right under his nose. Vince then adds that gun control to prevent rebellion is pointless. After these words, the king turns around and declares that it would be better not to take any action. Vince is very hurt by this decision and calls his father a coward. At this point, the heir to the royal family decides to leave, but his father informs him that the conversation is not over yet. Vince turns his head towards the ruler and explains that it is now time for the test, and he needs to go. After this, he heads towards the exit of the room and slams the door behind him. After some time, Vince gets into a carriage, which he uses to set off on important royal business. All this time, he thinks about his last conversation with his father, who was never able to understand him. But Vince's position is explained by the fact that some anti-monarchy groups are seeking to establish a parliament, which could lead to unrest. In this regard, he plans to become king as quickly as possible and create an ideal country. However, the existing foundation is still not sufficient to change the ruler. The situation is further complicated by the fact that Vince does not have a fiancée who could strengthen his position in society. At this point, his thoughts are abruptly interrupted as the helmsman of the carriage announces that they have arrived at their destination. Vince goes outside and is faced with a multitude of small orphaned children. Meanwhile, a letter from the royal palace arrives in the Duchy of Hartfield. The head of the family opens the envelope and carefully reads the contents of this message. After this, the Duke decides that the contents of the letter could be an excellent opportunity for their family to strengthen their position. After some time, the head of the family tells his children that he has received invitations to the ball. The event will take place at the royal palace, and Diana will make her debut there. However, no one expected such an honor for the villain, and Glenn and his sister show very surprised faces. The father notices their bewilderment, but Diana promises that she will try to do everything possible for a successful debut. At this moment, she realizes that in this way she will be able to meet Vincent in the palace and lure him to her side. After some time, Glenn goes to his father's office and tries to find out the reason why he wants to arrange Diana's marriage to Vincent. Although the girl is not considered a bargaining chip, it will still be good if she receives the status of His Highness's bride. After this, the head of the family recalls Diana's education and adds that she has impeccable etiquette. The only problem that remains is its origin, but nothing can be done about it. At this moment, Glenn hits the table and demands that his father stop joking like that because he can't laugh at other people's fates. A strong rage appears in his eyes, and the young man declares that he and other people are not his father's toys. But the head of the family asks his son to be careful with such expressions, since he simply works for his family. However, Glenn does not calm down and continues to show a rebellious spirit, considering all these words to be a lie. After all, the Duke's goal is to completely control this country from behind the scenes. After this, Glenn states that in that case, they should set some conditions on his father's venture. Meanwhile, Diana and Ryan head out into the garden to appreciate the fruits of their labor. The flowers that grew from the seeds have already blossomed, and they both enjoy seeing how the garden is gradually changing. Now Diana understands why her younger half-brother loves this place so much. At this point, she notices that Ryan's affection stat has already reached 16%. After this, Diana takes the watering can into her hands and invites her brother to water the remaining flowers. But Ryan manages to stop her and shouts loudly for Diana not to water them. It turns out that those yellow flowers are poisonous, and it's best not to touch them. Diana looks closely at the dangerous plants and replies that she understands everything. Meanwhile, the maid Dorothy notices someone appearing in the garden and begins to feel uneasy. She immediately bows to men passing by, thereby showing her respect. At this point, Ryan and Diana turn towards the garden guests and feel some confusion. The whole point is that Glenn and his father appear next to him, who asks his youngest son not to do this business and to entrust everything to the gardener. But Ryan decides to change the subject and asks the Duke what he might need. To this, the head of the family replies that Glenn warned him about the concerns regarding the royal banquet. In connection with this, a dance will be planned at the Marquis of Casey's house this evening, and Diana must go to it with her older brother. These words shock the girl, since such a sudden event was not part of her plans. However, this will only be a test to see if Diana is worthy of visiting the royal palace. Therefore, the Duke asks the girl to allow Glenn to accompany her and then make a decision. After this, her stepfather leaves and asks her to not disgrace herself by showing the dignity of a member of the Hartfield family. But Glenn's sympathy stat is still in the negative, which will make this task much more difficult for Diana. However, she does not intend to suffer defeat because her brother treats her badly. Now Diana has no choice but to defeat Glenn at today's tryout. Finally, that very moment comes, and the girl meets her brother on the street. He tells her that she has kept him waiting too long, but at the same moment he is speechless at the sight of her. After all, he sees Diana wearing a delightful off-the-shoulder dress that highlights her beautiful figure. Glenn begins to feel very excited at the sight of his stepsister being so beautiful. However, he tries not to show her his emotions and calmly offers the girl his hand. Diana is very surprised by this gesture, but the young man explains that his accompaniment is connected with exceptional nobility. But Glenn finds a reason to be sarcastic even in this situation and adds that his sister should also learn some manners. After that, they set off on their journey, and Diana realizes that it will be difficult for her to increase the sympathy of such a grumpy person. After some time, they find themselves in the possession of the Marquis Casey mansion and are preparing to get out of the carriage. At this moment, the door opens, and a difficult moment comes again in Diana's game. Glenn offers her his hand again and tells her that she needs to watch her steps. She sweetly thanks her brother for his concern and pretends that they have a wonderful relationship. And this is not done in vain, because at this moment many people are watching their behavior. However, sparks of genuine hatred never cease to sparkle between these half-brother and sister. At this time, Ryan and his parents are at home and having dinner in their dining room. The head of the family takes a glass of red wine in his hand and shakes it a little. Now the moment had come for him to find out the situation that was happening at the ball. At this time, in the house of Marquis Casey, the arrival of the eldest son Glenn from the Hartfield family is announced. Along with him, Diana appears on the threshold, not missing the opportunity to put on the glass slippers. But now few people care about this, because all attention is focused on her appearance and extraordinary charm. Glenn takes his companion by the hand and leads her to the center of the room, under the admiring glances of other people. After this, he and Diana approach the Marquis himself and thank him for the invitation. At this point, Diana curtsies and says that she is glad to meet the head of this house. The Marquis is enchanted by the sight of his guest and replies that it is a great honor for him to meet such a princess. He is also joined by his daughter Noel, who is also happy to see these people in her home. After this, the Marquis's daughter asks her father to let Diana go with her to show her the mansion. The owner of the house agrees and will only be glad if the girls get along with each other, so now the last word remains with Glenn. At this, the young man smiles sweetly and lets his companion go, asking her to be careful. After a while, the girls find themselves in a spacious hallway of the house, where they look at paintings. Noel reports that one of them was painted by a very great artist, and next to it is her father's favorite statue. At this moment, Diana carefully examines all the valuables and realizes that there is too much luxury in this house. However, the Marquis's daughter notices her absorption in thoughts and tries to regain the girl's attention. After all, Noel hasn't yet had time to show off all the beauty of her home, and there are many interesting things ahead of them. But the whole situation seems too strange to Diana, as there are fewer and fewer people around. Suddenly, Noel tells her that she made a big mistake by agreeing to go with her. Diana tries to ask the girl again about her words, as she cannot believe what she heard. However, Noel doesn't answer and just swings his hand. After this, she hits herself on the cheek and leaves a red mark on her face from the slap. But even that doesn't shock Diana as much as what Noel is going to do next. After all, the girl begins to push aside her father's favorite statuette and explains that she has always disliked the Hartfield family for their rudeness. She then adds that Diana looks like the daughter of a prostitute and at the same moment pushes the statue. The crash from the fall is so loud that it reaches all the way into the ballroom. Everyone immediately heads towards the frightening sound and finds Noel sitting on the floor. The girl starts to cry and says that Lady Diana suddenly got angry and beat her. Moreover, she even broke her father's precious statuette and thus responded to the desire to be friends with her. No matter how Diana tries to justify herself, Glenn understands that she has fallen into a trap. Now we can rest assured that his sister failed this exam. But his joy is short-lived as all attention turns to him. The thing is that Noli's father believes Glenn is involved in this crime and begins to publicly accuse him. He believes that it was Diana's brother who gave her the order to beat his daughter, and with these words, he greatly shocks the young man. Now the Hartfield's daughter understands that the situation is starting to take a completely different turn, for which she was not prepared. And the Marquis adds that this family wants to put him in an awkward position, since they themselves have already made it in life. But Glenn also doesn't understand what kind of nonsense the owner of the house is talking about and why he decided to drag his entire family into this. Meanwhile, everyone begins to discuss what happened and is not at all surprised by Diana's actions. However, no matter how much she was to blame, first of all, it was Glenn who did not keep an eye on her. This whole situation puts the members of the Hartfield family in a difficult position. But Glenn understands that all this was initially done with the aim of humiliating him and Diana. His sister also realizes that she is not the only one involved in all this, and that things are really bad. After all this time she thought that this was a test of her etiquette, but she was wrong. After this, the girl decides to grab her brother by the hand and lead him away from people. Diana does not say a word and quickly leaves the ill-fated place. At this point, Glenn states that their escape will only make things worse, and they shouldn't have done it. However, his sister explains that she is not the only one involved in this check. The whole point is that now everyone will be watching how they deal with this problem. After her words, Glenn understands that his father decided to test him, and this makes him very angry. While he clutches his head because Diana screwed up, a board with a choice appears in front of her. Now she no longer hears her brother's words and thinks only about whether she should start blaming others or apologizing. At that very moment, she decides to start cooperating with Glenn and ask for forgiveness. However, she notices something strange in his behavior, and her facial expression changes dramatically. The thing is that her brother's face became too serious and his gaze grew cold. After this, Glenn reports that collaborating with Diana is the worst thing that can happen. At that moment, he raises his hand to her and pushes the girl in the chest. Diana flies over the railing and begins to rapidly fly down from a great height. Everything happens so quickly that the girl doesn't even have time to realize anything. Meanwhile, Glenn calmly approaches the railing and looks down carefully. However, Diana cannot let this whole situation end so badly. But it's too late to do anything since Glenn has done the worst thing that could happen. Diana's lifeless body lies on the floor of the house where she was just betrayed by a member of her family. After this, her brother decides to calmly go downstairs to approach the girl. At this moment, a large number of people run to this place together with the owner of the house. They notice a situation where Glenn is leaning over his sister's body, grieving over the fact that she decided to kill herself. But Diana can no longer answer anything and somehow restore the lost justice. After this, all the people go down to Glenn and ask him to explain what happened here. He replies that Diana was innocent, but during the incident no one wanted to listen to her. And since this situation hurt the pride of the Hartfield family, the girl decided to jump down. At this point, one of the girls states that, in her opinion, it was not worth blaming Mrs. Diana like that. These words greatly surprise Noel, and she tries to understand what the guest means. But the whole crowd of people has already turned against the Casey family and demands that the Marquis answer for this incident. At this point, the owner of the house decides to somehow resolve the conflict and asks everyone to calm down. Meanwhile, Diana continues to lie on the floor and hears every word said. She can also clearly see her stepbrother's smirk, but she can't even move her lips. After this, she realizes that this situation is not even worth going through a life crisis. At that very second, time begins to rewind again and resets Diana to the starting point. The girl wakes up in her room and sees that the clock shows exactly midnight. At this moment, she realizes that Glenn has decided to turn her into his pawn and thus hide the shame. As expected, he is still the heir of a bloody family and can kill a person without any hesitation. However, Diana remembers that Glenn does not want to be like his father. After all, she created a character who fights against this injustice. Diana is even sure that in normal mode there was a similar scene with the main character. In it, Glenn wanted to change this house to protect the people dear to him. After this, the girl remembers the moment where her brother is next to his mother and newborn Ryan. His mother carefully takes the bundle containing the baby and hands it to Glenn. Although he was still little then, he loved his recently born brother with all his heart. After Ryan is in Glenn's arms, his face begins to glow with unusual joy. Even his mother notices this and explains that the baby looks very happy in his older brother's arms. A special bond is formed between them that cannot be destroyed by anything. And when Ryan grew up a little, he never stopped running after Glenn and rejoicing at his appearance. In one such situation, his older brother asked him not to run along the corridors of the house because it was unsafe. At that very moment, Ryan stumbles and falls to the floor, confirming Glenn's words. However, the young man understands that things are much worse and his face changes dramatically. The thing is that his younger brother was a very sickly child when he was a child, and after this situation, Ryan became very ill and even took to bed, where his mother looked after him. At that moment, Glenn was very worried about his brother, and his mother asked him to get some sleep. But he can't leave Ryan because he can't cope with this anxiety. However, his mother warns him that his younger brother will be very sad if Glenn gets sick too. After these words, he decides to listen to his mother and goes to his room through the large hall of the house. At this moment, he hears the voice of his father and the doctor, who are talking about something. Glenn decides to eavesdrop on their conversation and begins to quietly watch them through the half-open door. The doctor explains that Ryan was born weak and can easily get sick when the weather changes. The situation is further complicated by the fact that such ailments may continue in the future. After this verdict, the Duke says that in that case he does not need this child. Glenn hears all these words perfectly well and begins to experience incredible horror. And his father also adds that Ryan is just a spare, and with such a weak body he is useless. The doctor understands perfectly well what the head of the Hartfields is getting at, and asks to be given the opportunity to take care of everything. He suggests poisoning the child and making it look like he himself is dying from the disease. Glenn begins to experience even more shock as he realizes that his beloved brother is about to be killed. After this, he decides not to hesitate and quickly runs through the corridors of his house. At one point, the young man stops and tries to understand what he should do now. Suddenly, his mother appears behind him, asking him to go to bed early. But now it's night, and she doesn't understand what her son is doing in the hall at such a late hour. At this moment, he turns to her with his upset face and tries to ask the main question. Meanwhile, outside the mansion, everything is calm, as if there are no problems inside this house. But the mother sees her child's great fear and is ready to listen to him attentively. After this, Glenn asks if Ryan is really going to be killed. To this, Mom replies that she won't allow this to happen and will definitely come up with something. She asks her son to calm down and not worry about this anymore. After this, the whole family goes to bed while the bright moon shines in the sky. The next morning, Mom and Glenn go to Ryan's room and sit by his bed. At this moment, a doctor comes in and tells them that it is time to take their medication. The mother notices a flask of liquid on his tray and realizes that this must kill her son. After this, she takes this poison into her hands and the doctor does not have time to react to it. She then brings this deadly liquid to her mouth and begins to drink it. Drop by drop, the poison penetrates her body and almost nothing remains inside the flask. Meanwhile, the doctor's facial expression changes dramatically and begins to show severe shock. Glenn also experiences an extraordinary horror as he realizes that his mother drank poison. After this, the flask falls from the mother's hands and begins to fall down, leaving drops of deadly liquid on the hem of her dress. The girl herself falls after her, leaving her lifeless body and traces of broken glass on the floor. At this moment, servants burst into the room and see a terrifying picture before them. They understand that the owner of the house was poisoned, but the doctor tries in every way to justify himself and says that some kind of mistake occurred. Suddenly, the Duke appears on the scene and demands that this noise stop. There is absolute calm and composure on his face, as well as disappointment from the whole situation. After his appearance, the head of the family says that he regrets trusting the doctor's medical skills. Without saying another word, he asks for the man to be taken away, and the servants immediately comply with his request. After this, Glenn learned that the doctor had committed suicide in his own cell, but he did not believe that he had left life voluntarily. The young man is sure that his father killed him to silence him forever and not reveal the truth. Fortunately, after some time, his mother comes to her senses and asks Glenn for forgiveness. But her son is only interested in the answer to the question of why she took Ryan's medicine. After this, she pauses for a moment and thinks seriously about something. Then the mother reports that after the news of Ryan's planned poisoning, this medicine seemed suspicious to her and she drank it. After all, the only way to find out everything was to test it on yourself. And since the incident will now be on everyone's lips, it will be difficult for the poisoner to get close to Ryan. Suddenly, Mother starts coughing and Glenn is seriously worried about her condition. But she tells him that she is fine and that after a little rest, she will be able to recover quickly. After this, she extends her hands forward and asks Glenn to come to her. At this moment, the mother hugs her son tightly, which he did not expect at all. She then asks Glenn to take care of his little brother for her. After some time, his mother dies, never having coped with the consequences of the poisoning. Glenn and Ryan stand at her grave and cannot believe that their mother is no longer with them. Her eldest son remembers his mother's words that she should get better. At this point, Ryan starts to cry heavily because he doesn't understand the reason for his mother's death. Now Glenn feels very sorry for his brother because he dragged his mother into this whole situation. After this, he remembers her last request that he take care of his younger brother. Since then, Glenn has made it his goal to protect Ryan at any cost and fulfill his mother's request. Now he intends to destroy all enemies no matter what method he has to use. At this moment, Diana returns to reality as she remembered everything about this character. This is the exact story she came up with for Glenn when she was involved in creating this game. But now, if she chooses the second option, she will face a deadly outcome. However, she still hasn't found any clues, so she needs to start looking for them. Meanwhile, it is deep night in the mansion and everyone is already asleep, so Diana quietly goes to one of the rooms of the house. She goes into the library and takes a lit candle with her to find the information she needs. The girl opens one of the books and carefully reads what is written in it. One of the pages depicts the very same poisonous flower that she recently saw in the garden. At that moment, Ryan forbade his sister to touch him, as it was very dangerous. After this, the evening of the ball arrives and Diana gets into the carriage and goes to the Marquise's house. She decides that she needs to talk to Glenn about everything before the event starts. At this moment, she focuses her gaze on her brother and chooses the right words. Diana tells him that her father is checking not only her but him too, which leaves the young man feeling bewildered. She then adds that their behavior at the ball determines the reputation of the house and they need to be more careful. After her words, Glenn becomes very tense and realizes that Diana is aware of everything that is happening. So he decides to ask what she wants to achieve from him in that case. To this, the girl replies that she knows very well about his dislike for her, but now he needs to enter into cooperation with her for the sake of the future. Diana knows very well that Glenn wants to change this house and offers him a solution for this. But he believes that his sister wants to take over their family from behind the scenes, and that is why she has changed her behavior so abruptly. However, the girl did not expect to hear such conclusions and was a little puzzled by this. After these words, she loses her temper and declares that there is no point in her doing this at all. At this moment, a sign appears to her indicating that Diana has managed to clear up the misunderstanding with Glenn. All this time, her brother believed that she would prevent him from removing the head of the house and therefore treated her with hostility. In this regard, she decides to add that she simply wanted a quiet life, so she changed her attitude. At this point, Glenn's sympathy score has improved by 5%, and he even admits his guilt in initially misunderstanding his sister's motives. However, this does not change the fact that he hates her, so he does not intend to cooperate with her. Glenn then adds that he can handle it on his own, and that Diana should do her best too. But his sister tries to reach out to him and asks if there is any point in such stubbornness. After all, in the end, he will still have to use the help of those around him. Otherwise, it turns out that all of Glenn's words about his intention to change this house are empty words. After this phrase, Diana's older brother loses his temper and abruptly gets up from his seat. But the girl grabs his hand and adds that such a hot-tempered person cannot make cold-blooded judgments, and they are not alone here. Therefore, he had better be careful with his actions and not make such mistakes. Diana understands that Glenn will not kill her in front of other people, and if she does not lure him to her side, then she will not see a different future. So she decides to continue her game and lets go of her older brother's hand. After this, Glenn reports that he knows and understands everything perfectly well without her. But all he wants is for Ryan to live happily and for no one to attempt on his life. At that moment, he remembers that very day when she stood in front of her mother's grave. After all, the words he spoke were what he promised his mother before she died. But Diana says that Ryan is not so helpless that he constantly needs someone's protection. After all, he himself helped Diana more than once, and each time he did it in the best possible way. All this leads to the fact that it is not so bad to rely on others, and Ryan understands this very well. At this moment, Glenn remembers his brother's words, where he asks him to help in one matter. These arguments make him calm down and think about everything Diana said. It turns out that for him, Ryan is still the boy who suffered in his bed. Glenn realizes that he has been a fool all this time, and his sympathy score improves by another 8%. Now he is ready to cooperate with Diana and agrees to help her the moment something happens. After this, they conclude a temporary truce, which is limited to this ball. After some time, the situation with Noel repeats itself, and she again begins to accuse Diana of the attack. Feigned bitter tears appear in her eyes, and the girl says that she just wanted to make friends. At this point, the Marquis decides to blame Glenn for everything and says that it was his order. After these words, he turns his gaze to Diana and expects some action from her. But the girl realizes that she has once again found herself in Noel's self-made performance and that once again everyone is condemning her brother. Diana decides to take a step, as she understands that this part of events cannot be avoided anyway. After this, she tells everyone that she and Glenn are innocent, and she is even ready to prove it. These unexpected words make her older half-brother very surprised. The owners of the house are also shocked, as they do not expect their deception to be revealed. At this point, Diana announces that all attempts to trap and convict her will fail.